My grandmother's house stood at the bottom of a hollow in Mingo County, West Virginia, where the road turned to dirt and the trees came in so close that by late afternoon the only sunlight that reached the property was a thin band that slid across the front yard like a searchlight before disappearing behind the ridge. The house had been there since 1947. My great-grandfather built it with timber he'd cut himself from the hillside above, and he'd done it the way men in that part of the state did everything in those years. By hand, by eye, and with a confidence in his own judgment that didn't always translate into structural precision. The walls were straight enough if you didn't look too carefully. The floors were level enough if you didn't set a marble down. The rooms connected in an order that made sense to the man who built them, and nobody else. The kitchen opened into a hallway that turned twice before reaching the living room, which was somehow on the opposite side of the house from where you'd expect it, and the staircase to the second floor was tucked behind a door that looked like a closet and surprised every visitor who opened it, expecting to find coats. The house had been added onto 3 times over the decades. My great-grandfather built the original structure 4 rooms, 1 story, a covered porch. My grandfather enclosed the porch in the 60s and turned it into a front room with windows that leaked in every rainstorm. My Uncle Roy added the second floor in the 70s, which was really just 2 bedrooms and a bathroom stacked on top of the kitchen and the back hallway, connected to the original house by the disguised staircase and a general sense of architectural optimism. And at some point, nobody could say exactly when someone had added a utility room off the back of the kitchen, a low-ceilinged, windowless space that housed the water heater, the breaker panel, and a collection of household overflow that had been accumulating since before I was born. The house was my grandmother's domain. She'd lived there since she married my grandfather in 1963, and by the time I was old enough to have memories of the place, she'd been its sole occupant for almost a decade, my grandfather having passed in the late 80s from a heart that gave out the way hearts do when you spend 40 years in the mines, and another 20 pretending the damage doesn't matter. She kept the house the way she kept everything clean, organized, and running on a schedule that didn't bend for weather or circumstance or the opinions of her children, who periodically suggested she move somewhere smaller, somewhere closer to town, somewhere that wasn't at the bottom of a hollow, where the power went out every time the wind changed direction. She ignored them. The house was hers, and she operated it with the quiet authority of a woman who had earned every room in it through decades of maintenance and loss. The family reunion was her event held every August, hosted on her property, attended by everyone who shared her blood, and a fair number of people who didn't, but who had been coming long enough that nobody questioned their presence. The reunion was not optional. You came, you ate, you visited, and you stayed until she told you it was time to go. My mother drove us down from Charleston every year, and I looked forward to it the way I looked forward to Christmas, not for the food or the relatives, but for the house itself, which to an 11-year-old was less a building and more a landscape, a territory of hidden spaces and unexplored corners that rewarded investigation in ways that modern houses never could. I was 11 the year it happened. August. Hot in the way that West Virginia gets hot in late summer, not the dry heat of a desert, but the thick, saturated heat that rises from the ground and hangs in the air like something you have to push through. The hollow trapped it, the trees held it. By mid-afternoon, the only relief was inside the house, where the window units labored and the cross breeze through the kitchen carried just enough movement to keep the air from feeling solid. The adults were doing what adults did at reunions, eating, talking, migrating between the yard and the kitchen in a slow, purposeless orbit that would continue until dark. The kids there were 7 of us that year. Ages 8 to 14 had been released into the general population of the house and yard, with the understanding that we would not break anything, set anything on fire, or require medical attention. By 3 o'clock, we'd exhausted the outdoor possibilities. The creek was too low to swim, the hill was too hot to climb, and the tire swing had been declared off-limits after my cousin Kevin had demonstrated, convincingly, that the rope was one good push away from failure. Hide and seek was my cousin Dale's idea. Dale was 14 and had the commanding presence of a kid who was bigger than everyone else and knew it. He proposed the rules. The whole house was in play, including the second floor, the basement, and any room that wasn't locked. The yard was out. The only boundary was the walls of the building itself. Whoever was found last won, though what they won was never specified, because in our family, winning was its own reward, and the reward was the right to remind everyone else that you'd won for the rest of the day. Dale was it. He stood in the front room with his face against the wall and started counting. Loud, slow, theatrical. Dale did everything theatrically. 1, 2, 3. The rest of us scattered. I could hear feet on the stairs, doors opening and closing. The muffled chaos of 6 kids trying to disappear into a house that had absorbed stranger things than children. I went for the utility room. I'd been thinking about it all afternoon. The utility room was off the back of the kitchen, through a door that stuck in its frame and required a specific combination of lifting and pulling that most people couldn't figure out on the first try. Inside, it was dim and crowded. The water heater dominated the left wall, a tall cylindrical tank that hummed with a constant low vibration. The breaker panel was on the right, a gray metal box with a handwritten legend taped to the inside of the door that my grandfather had made decades ago and that nobody had updated since. And along the back wall, between the water heater and a shelf unit loaded with old paint cans and jars of screws and the general sediment of 60 years of household maintenance, there was a gap, a space about 2 feet wide that ran behind the water heater, created by the tank being positioned about 18 inches from the back wall. It was dark back there. It was tight. It was the kind of space that adults would never think to check, because adults don't think in terms of spaces, they think in terms of rooms. I squeezed in. The water heater was warm against my left side, the shelf unit cool against my right. The back wall drywall, unpainted, slightly rough under my palms, pressed against my shoulder blades as I settled into a crouch with my knees drawn up. I was invisible. Even if someone opened the utility room door and looked around, they'd see the water heater, the breaker panel, the shelves. They wouldn't see me. I was behind the architecture, tucked into the building's negative space, occupying a gap that the house had created by accident and that I was exploiting by design. I could hear Dale counting from the front room. His voice was muffled by the intervening walls and doors, reduced to a rhythmic pulse of sound that I tracked more by vibration than by clarity. 23, 24, 25. I settled in. I controlled my breathing, slow, quiet, the way you breathe when you're hiding, and every exhale feels like a signal flare. The utility room was still. The water heater hummed. The air smelled like dust and old metal, and the particular mineral staleness of spaces that don't get open to fresh air. I was proud of my spot. I was going to win. I was going to sit here in the dark while Dale searched every room, every closet, every obvious hiding place. And he was never going to find me because I was in a place that didn't register as a place. I was in the walls. Dale reached 50, 60, 70. His voice was fading as my attention turned inward, settling into the rhythm of waiting. 80, 85. The house was quiet now. The other kids were hidden, the adults were outside, and the building had entered that particular stillness that old houses achieve when everyone in them stops moving at the same time. That's when I heard the breathing. It came from behind me. Not from the utility room, from behind the wall, from the space on the other side of the drywall that my back was pressed against. It was slow, deliberate. The kind of breathing that belongs to someone who is conscious of being heard and is trying to be quiet but can't stop the fundamental process of drawing air and releasing it. Each inhale was a measured pull, careful and controlled. Each exhale was a soft push, barely audible over the hum of the water heater. But I heard it, in the dark, in the silence, pressed against the wall with my ear inches from the surface. I heard another person breathing on the other side. My body went rigid. Not a decision, a reflex. Every muscle locked simultaneously, the full body paralysis of a prey animal that has detected a predator and is relying on stillness as its last defense. My breath stopped. My hands, which had been resting on my knees, gripped my shins so hard I could feel my fingernails pressing crescents into the skin through my jeans. The breathing continued, unchanged by my silence. Steady, patient, the rhythm of someone who was not reacting to my presence, but had been there before I arrived, who had been breathing behind that wall when I squeezed into the gap, who had been breathing when I settled into my crouch, who had been breathing for however long they'd been in the space beyond the drywall, a space I hadn't known existed, a space that the house contained without revealing. Then the knocking. 3 taps, soft. Not the sharp report of a fist against drywall, the gentle, measured pressure of knuckles touching a surface with deliberate restraint. 3 taps, evenly spaced, delivered at the exact height of my right ear, as if whoever was on the other side of the wall knew precisely where my head was and had aimed accordingly. as if they could see me through the drywall, or sense me, or had mapped my position with a precision that the barrier between us did nothing to prevent. I didn't scream. The scream was there coiled in my chest, hot and pressurized and ready, but the pathway between the impulse and my throat had been severed by a fear so total that my body couldn't organize itself around a response. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I crouched in the dark behind the water heater, and I listened to 3 soft knocks on a wall that I was leaning against, and I understood with the absolute clarity of a child's terror that I was not alone in the hidden space, that the gap I'd chosen as my hiding place was adjacent to another gap, and in that other gap, someone was already hiding. The knocking came again. 3 taps, same cadence, same gentleness, same precision, and this time I felt it. The drywall vibrated against my shoulder blade, a faint, physical tremor that traveled through the gypsum and into my body and confirmed what my ears had already told me. Something with hands was on the other side of the wall, close, inches away, separated from me by a layer of material so thin that its vibrations passed through it and into my bones. I moved. The paralysis broke not gradually but all at once, the way ice breaks, sudden and total. My body lunged out of the gap with a violence that I didn't initiate and couldn't control. My shoulder caught the shelf unit and sent it sideways, paint cans crashing to the concrete floor in a cascade of metallic bangs that echoed through the utility room and beyond. I scrambled across the floor on my hands and knees, reached the door, pulled it open with a strength I didn't know I had, and burst into the kitchen. My grandmother was there. She was at the counter, slicing tomatoes, her back to me when I came through the door. She turned at the sound. The crash of the cans had been loud enough to reach the kitchen, and saw me standing in the doorway, white-faced, shaking, my breath coming in gasps that hitched and caught like fabric on a nail. I told her. The words came out disordered, tumbling over each other, breathing behind the wall, knocking, the wall vibrating. Something back there, someone back there, in the wall, right behind me. I said it all in a rush, and I watched her face as I said it, and what I saw there wasn't confusion or amusement or the patient skepticism of an adult listening to a child who had scared himself in a dark room. It was recognition, brief, immediate, and quickly controlled, but I saw it. The flash of understanding in her eyes, the slight parting of her lips, the way her hand tightened on the knife before she set it down. She knew, not that I was telling the truth, necessarily, but that what I was describing was something she had context for, something that fit into a framework she already possessed. She came around the counter and put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me with an intensity that I had never seen from her before and have never seen from anyone since. "You don't go in that room anymore," she said. Not a suggestion, a command, delivered with the authority of a woman who had raised 4 children and buried a husband and run a household alone for a decade and had earned the right to issue orders that were not questioned. "You don't play in there. You don't hide in there. You stay out of that room." She didn't explain. I asked why. She said, "Because I told you." The universal grandmother override, the answer that terminates all inquiry by replacing reason with authority. She went back to her tomatoes. I went outside and sat on the porch and didn't play hide and seek again that day or any day at my grandmother's house for the rest of my childhood. The house went to my Uncle Dennis when my grandmother passed in 2018. She'd been there until the end, stubbornly, defiantly there. In the house her husband had expanded and her father-in-law had built, at the bottom of the hollow where the road turned to dirt and the trees kept the sunlight to a thin daily ration. Dennis started renovations that winter, updated the wiring, replaced the plumbing, fixed the things that my grandmother had kept running through sheer willpower and an encyclopedic knowledge of which surfaces could be patched and which ones needed prayer. He called me in February. His voice on the phone had a quality I'd never heard from him before, a thinness, a care in the way he chose his words, as if each one was a step on uncertain ground. He told me they'd opened the wall in the utility room, the drywall behind the water heater. They'd torn it out to access the plumbing, and behind it, instead of framing and insulation and the exterior foundation, they'd found a space, a crawl space, framed out, intentional, about 4 feet high, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, running between the interior wall of the utility room and the stone foundation of the original house. Inside the crawl space, they found a sleeping bag, green, synthetic, mildewed flat from years of compression. The kind of thing you'd buy at an army surplus store for $10 and use until it fell apart. It was laid out on the dirt floor, positioned against the foundation wall, oriented so that whoever lay in it would be lying parallel to the utility room wall. Parallel to the spot where I'd crouched 11 years old and terrified, my back against the drywall, my ear inches from the breathing on the other side. They found cans, dozens of them, pull-tab food cans, beans, soup, Vienna sausages, the cheap kind you buy in bulk when nutrition matters less than survival. They were empty, rinsed, and stacked against the wall in neat rows. Not discarded. Organized. The refuse of someone who had developed a system for living in a space the size of a coffin. And on the wooden studs that framed the crawl space, the vertical 2x4s that supported the wall I'd leaned against, there were scratches. Hundreds of them. Grouped in sets of 5, 4 vertical lines crossed by 1 diagonal. Tally marks. The universal notation of someone counting days or hours or some other unit of time in a place where no clock existed and no calendar hung, and the only way to measure the passage of life was to mark it on wood with your fingernails or nail or whatever hard edge you could find in the dark. Dennis told me the police had come. They'd documented the space. They'd taken the sleeping bag and the cans. They'd photographed the tally marks. The investigation had produced no answers, no DNA they could match, no fingerprints they could run, no identity for the person who had lived in the walls of my grandmother's house in a hollow in Mingo County, West Virginia, for a period of time that the tally marks suggested was measured in months rather than weeks. He asked me if I remembered what happened when I was 11. I told him I did. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me the part that has stayed with me since. The part that I think about in the dark, in the quiet hours, in the moments when the house I live in now settles and creaks and produces sounds that my rational mind identifies as normal and my body responds to with a vigilance that I can't turn off. The access point to the crawl space, the modified framing that created an opening between the utility room wall and the hidden space, was on the crawl space side. The studs had been cut and reframed from inside. Whoever built the entrance had done it from within the crawl space itself, working in a space too small to stand in, modifying the structure of the house from behind its own walls. And there was no other way in. No exterior access, no tunnel, no second opening. The crawl space was sealed on all sides by foundation stone and framing and drywall, with one opening that had been created from the inside by someone who was already there. I don't understand it. Dennis didn't understand it. The police didn't understand it. A person was living in a space they couldn't have entered, eating food that had no visible means of delivery in a crawl space behind the wall of a utility room in my grandmother's house. And my grandmother knew. She knew something was there. She'd told me to stay out of that room with a certainty that preceded my story, a certainty that came from her own experience with whatever was behind that wall. And the knocking. 3 soft taps right next to my ear, at the exact height of my head. Not violent, not aggressive, soft. The way you knock on a door when you don't want to disturb the household but you need someone to know you're there. The way you knock when you've been alone for a very long time and the only thing on the other side of the wall is a child's breathing and the warmth of another living body inches away. I was hiding. And on the other side of the wall, in a space that shouldn't have been there and couldn't have been entered, someone was hiding too. And for one moment, 3 gentle knocks in the dark, they reached out. Not to scare me, not to threaten me, to let me know they were there. The way you do when the loneliness has gone on longer than you thought was possible, and the sound of someone else's heartbeat through a thin wall becomes the most important thing in the world. I think about that person sometimes, lying in the dark on a mildewed sleeping bag, eating cold beans from a can, scratching marks on a wooden stud to keep track of time that has no other shape. Listening to the house above them, the footsteps, the voices, the sounds of a family living a life that they're close enough to hear but sealed away from by inches of drywall and decades of silence. And I think about my grandmother, standing in her kitchen, slicing tomatoes, knowing that something lived in her walls and choosing to manage it the way mountain people have always managed the unmanageable, not by confrontation but by boundaries. Stay out of that room. Don't play in there. Don't hide in there. Don't knock back. The house sits at the end of Clinch Mountain Road, about 4 miles outside of Tazewell, Virginia, in a part of the county where the road narrows to a single lane and the pavement gives way to gravel, and the gravel gives way to dirt, and the dirt gives way to nothing. There are 6 houses on Clinch Mountain Road, And mine is the last one, the one where the road stops, pretending to go somewhere, and just ends in a turnaround of packed earth and weeds. Beyond the turnaround, there's a tree line. Beyond the tree line, there's the mountain. Beyond the mountain, there's more mountain. That's the geography of my life, and I chose it deliberately. I moved here in 2019 after 22 years, working maintenance at a paper mill in Richlands that closed when the company decided it was cheaper to make paper in Brazil than in Southwest Virginia. I was 54, single had been since my divorce in 2012, and I had enough savings to buy a small house outright if I didn't care about location or condition. I didn't care about either. What I cared about was distance. Distance from traffic and noise and the particular brand of human proximity that I'd spent 2 decades enduring in a mill where 500 people shared the same air and the same complaints and the same slow, grinding awareness that the thing they were building their lives around was disappearing underneath them. The house was built in the 70s, a single-story ranch, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a covered front porch that runs the width of the building. It's nothing special. Vinyl siding, asphalt shingles, a propane furnace that works most of the time. The nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile back down the road, an elderly couple named the Stillners who keep to themselves and whose porch light I can see on clear nights if I stand at the end of my driveway and look south. Beyond the Stillners, there are 4 more houses spaced at irregular intervals along the road, all of them occupied by people who chose this place for the same reason I did, because it's far away from everything and everything is far away from it. There are no street lights on Clinch Mountain Road. The county doesn't service the road past the second house, which means no snow plowing, no repaving, no infrastructure of any kind beyond the gravel and the drainage ditches that were dug by whoever built the road and have been maintained by nobody since. After sunset, the darkness on Clinch Mountain Road is absolute. Not the darkness of a suburban street where the ambient glow of a city somewhere over the horizon keeps the sky a shade lighter than true black. This is mountain darkness. The darkness of a place where the nearest artificial light is a quarter-mile away, and the trees block even that. And when the moon is down and the clouds are in, the darkness is so complete that you can hold your hand 6 inches from your face and not see it. The porch light is the boundary. That's how I think of it, not as a convenience or a safety feature, but as a boundary. A line drawn in light that separates my space from the dark. It's a simple fixture, a brass housing with a frosted glass globe mounted beside the front door, controlled by a switch inside the house. The bulb is a 60-watt incandescent, the kind that throws a warm yellow circle about 15 feet in diameter, illuminating the porch, the top of the steps, and a narrow strip of the yard beyond. Beyond that circle, the dark starts. And on Clinch Mountain Road, the dark doesn't transition. It doesn't fade from light to dim to gray to black. It starts at the edge of the porch light's reach like a wall, and beyond that wall, there is nothing your eyes can use. I leave the porch light on all night, every night. I've done this since I moved in, and I've never once turned it off between sunset and sunrise. It's not fear, or it wasn't, before November. It was habit. The same habit that makes you lock a door even when you're home, that makes you check the stove even when you haven't cooked. The porch light stays on because it stays on. Because the alternative is a house that sits in total darkness on a road that nobody drives at night. And while I chose solitude, I didn't choose to be invisible. November 14th was a Thursday. I remember the day because I'd driven into Tazewell that morning for groceries and a doctor's appointment routine checkup. Nothing remarkable, and I'd gotten back to the house around 4 in the afternoon, just as the light was starting to go. November days in the mountains are short and gray, the sun sliding behind the ridgeline by 4:30, the twilight lasting maybe 20 minutes before the dark arrives. I put the groceries away, made dinner, cleaned up, and settled onto the couch with a book around 8 p.m. The porch light was on. The doors were locked. The house was warm and quiet and sealed against the November cold. I read until about 11. The book was one of those historical novels that my ex-wife had always dismissed as boring, but that I found comforting, long, slow, predictable, the literary equivalent of a warm bath. I was about to set it down and head to bed when the porch light went off. Not a flicker, not the momentary disruption of a power surge or a loose connection. The light was on, and then it was off, cleanly, completely, as if someone had flipped the switch. I looked at the front door. The switch plate was on the wall beside it, a simple toggle, up for on and down for off. Even from the couch, 10 feet away, I could see that the switch was in the up position. The switch was on, the light was off. I got up and walked to the door. I flipped the switch down and back up. Nothing. The porch remained dark. I could see it through the window beside the door, the glass showing me a rectangle of blackness where the warm yellow glow should have been. The porch, the steps, the yard all gone, swallowed by the dark that started at the edge of my house and went all the way to the mountain. I opened the front door. The air hit me cold, still, carrying the smell of dead leaves and wood smoke from the Stillner's chimney a quarter mile away. I stepped onto the porch and looked up at the fixture. The bulb was there, intact, not shattered, not burned out, but it was loose, turned counterclockwise by what I estimated was a quarter rotation, just enough to break the contact between the base of the bulb and the socket's center terminal, just enough to kill the circuit without removing the bulb entirely. I reached up and turned the bulb clockwise. It seated with a soft click, and the light came on immediately warm, yellow, throwing its familiar circle across the porch and the top of the steps. The bulb was fine. The fixture was fine. The switch was fine. The only thing that had been wrong was the bulb's position in the socket, which had been changed by someone who had stood on my porch, reached up to the fixture, and turned the bulb until the light went out. I stood there for a moment, looking at the yard, the driveway, the dark tree line beyond. Nothing moved. The air was still. The road was empty. The only sound was the faint hiss of the propane furnace cycling through the wall behind me, and the distant, arrhythmic creak of a bare branch rubbing against another somewhere in the woods. I went back inside. I locked the door deadbolt and knob lock, which I always engaged, but which now felt insufficient in a way they hadn't before. I checked the back door, locked. I checked the windows, 6 of them, 3 on each side of the house, all latched. I sat back down on the couch and picked up my book, but I wasn't reading. I was listening. Listening to the house, to the road, to the space beyond the walls that was now darker than it should have been because someone had been on my porch and turned off my light. I told myself it was kids. That was the rational explanation, and the only one I was willing to entertain. Teenagers from down the road, bored on a Thursday night, driving up to the dead end to mess with the hermit at the last house. It wouldn't be the first time 2 summers ago someone had knocked my mailbox off its post, and the summer before that, I'd found beer cans in the turnaround. Rural mischief. The kind of thing you accept as the tax on living far enough away from people that the ones who do come around feel entitled to leave their mark. 20 minutes passed. I'd managed to read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a word when the light went off again. Same thing. Clean, total, instant, on and then off, as if a switch had been thrown, except the switch was still in the up position, and the only thing that could have caused the light to go out was the same thing that had caused it the first time. I got up. I went to the door. I opened it and stepped onto the porch and looked at the bulb. Loose. Quarter turn counterclockwise. The exact same adjustment, performed with the exact same precision, in the 20 minutes since I'd last tightened it. I tightened it again. The light came on. I went back inside and locked the door. But this time, I didn't sit down on the couch. I went to the window, the one to the left of the front door, the one that looked out onto the porch from inside the house. I pulled the curtain closed, leaving a gap of maybe 2 inches along the left edge, and I positioned myself so that I could see the porch through that gap without being visible from outside. The curtain was heavy, dark fabric, opaque, and the living room behind me was lit only by a single lamp in the far corner, dim enough that my silhouette wouldn't register against the window. I was invisible, or I believed I was. I stood there and watched. The porch light burned steady. The circle of yellow light illuminated the boards, the railing, the top of the steps. Beyond that, the dark. The clock in the kitchen ticked. The furnace cycled. My breath fogged against the cold window glass, and I wiped it away with my sleeve and kept watching. 15 minutes passed, maybe 16. I'd stopped checking the clock because looking away from the window felt like a concession, a break in attention that whatever was out there might be waiting for. I watched the porch with the sustained, unblinking focus of a man who has been shown that his boundary can be crossed and is waiting to see it crossed again. The hand came from below. It appeared at the bottom of the porch, railing the left side, closest to the steps. It rose slowly, from a position below the railing's lower rail, extending upward with a deliberate, unhurried motion that suggested the person attached to it was standing on the porch steps or on the ground beside them, reaching up and over the railing toward the light fixture. It was a human hand, pale in the porch light, the fingers extended, the wrist emerging from a dark sleeve, a jacket or a long-sleeve shirt, dark-colored, the fabric disappearing into the shadow below the railing. The hand rose with the patient, practiced motion of someone who had done this before, not fumbling, not reaching blindly, moving directly and precisely toward the light fixture. The way a hand moves toward a doorknob, it's turned 1,000 times. The fingers found the bulb. They closed around the glass gently, the pads of the fingers making contact, the thumb and forefinger positioning themselves on opposite sides of the bulb's base. And then they turned, counterclockwise, slowly. A quarter rotation, performed with the careful, mechanical patience of a person who was in no hurry and had no concern about being observed. I was 6 feet away, 6 feet, separated by a window and a curtain with a 2-inch gap. I was looking at the hand of someone who was standing on my porch, in the dark, at 11:40 p.m. on a Thursday night, calmly and methodically unscrewing my porch light for the 3rd time. And the hand was steady. No tremor, no hesitation. The fingers moved with the smooth confidence of someone performing a familiar task, a routine, an action they had done enough times that the motion had become automatic. The bulb loosened. The light went out. The hand withdrew, not quickly, not with the jerking retreat of someone who'd been caught. Slowly, deliberately, it descended below the railing and disappeared into the shadow, and the porch was dark, and I was standing at the window in the dark, my hand pressed flat against the cold glass. My breath stopped somewhere between my lungs and my mouth. Then I heard the footsteps. They moved across the porch from left to right, from the light fixture toward the steps on the right side. Not running, walking, the measured, unhurried pace of someone who was leaving but not fleeing. Each step was distinct, the solid, weighted sound of a boot on wood, evenly spaced, rhythmically consistent. The footsteps reached the steps and descended 1, 2, 3, the sound changing from wood to the softer crunch of gravel as the person reached the ground. The gravel footsteps continued across the driveway, left to right, moving away from the house, toward the road. They maintained the same pace, steady, calm, the walk of a person who had finished what they came to do and was leaving on their own schedule. The sound faded as the distance increased, growing quieter and quieter until the gravel gave way to the dirt of the road and the footsteps were absorbed by the silence and the dark. Then nothing. I stood at the window for another 10 minutes. My legs were shaking, not from cold, from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. My hands were pressed against the glass so hard that my fingertips were white. I was breathing in shallow, rapid cycles that I couldn't control, my body running a program that my mind hadn't authorized. I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who answered sounded the way deputies sound at midnight on a Thursday, when the call is from Clinch Mountain Road, patient, slightly weary, the voice of someone who expects the complaint to involve a noise or a dog or a domestic situation that will resolve itself before they arrive. I told him someone had been on my porch. Someone had been unscrewing my light bulb 3 times. I'd seen the hand. I'd heard the footsteps. Someone had been standing on my property in the dark, systematically removing my only source of exterior light, and they had done it with a calm and a patience that frightened me more than if they'd thrown a brick through my window. The deputy came. It took about 30 minutes. He was young, polite, thorough, in the way that training makes you thorough when experience hasn't yet taught you what to skip. He walked the porch with a flashlight. He checked the fixture, the railing, the steps. He walked the perimeter of the house. He checked the yard. He found the footprints in the flower bed. I had a narrow strip of garden along the front of the house, between the porch foundation and the driveway, just some mulch and a few bushes that I hadn't bothered to dig up after they died in the fall. The mulch was soft from recent rain, and in it, clearly defined, were shoe prints. Boot prints, actually a large tread pattern, the kind made by a work boot or a hiking boot. The deputy measured them against a ruler he kept in his kit, size 12. Men's. The prints started at the edge of the road, where the gravel met the dirt, and led in a straight line to the front porch. They didn't wander, they didn't deviate. They came from the road to the house in a direct path, as if the person who made them had known exactly where they were going and hadn't needed to pause or redirect. The prints went to the base of the porch steps and then stopped. The porch itself was wood and wouldn't hold prints. On the return path, the same prints led from the base of the porch steps back to the road, following a parallel track about 3 feet from the inbound prints. 2 straight lines, one coming, one going with the house at one end and the road at the other. The deputy followed the prints to the road. At the road's edge, they disappeared. The packed dirt of the road surface was too hard to hold impressions, and there were no tire tracks, no indication that a vehicle had been parked nearby. Whoever had come to my house had either walked from somewhere on the road or had parked far enough away that the connection between the vehicle and the prints was broken. The deputy took photographs. He wrote his report. He told me what I already knew, that someone had trespassed on my property and tampered with my porch light, which was technically criminal mischief and trespassing, but practically impossible to prosecute without identifying the person. He suggested I install a motion-activated floodlight. He suggested I consider a security camera. He said he'd increase patrols on Clinch Mountain Road, which we both knew meant one extra drive past the Stillner's house per week. He left around 1:30 a.m., and I watched his taillights recede down the gravel until they turned the bend and disappeared. And then I was alone again on a road with no streetlights and a porch light that someone wanted off. I installed the floodlight the following weekend. Motion-activated, hardwired, mounted under the eave where no one could reach it without a ladder. I also installed a camera, a simple battery-operated unit aimed at the front porch, recording to an SD card. I tightened the porch light bulb and left it on. The floodlight has triggered 3 times since November. Once for a deer that walked through the yard, once for a raccoon on the porch, once at 2:47 a.m. on a Saturday in January, for nothing. The camera captured the floodlight activating, the porch and yard illuminated in harsh white light, and no visible source for the trigger. No animal, no person, no movement of any kind. The light stayed on for its programmed 30 seconds and then shut off. The camera recorded 30 seconds of an empty porch, an empty yard, and a tree line that showed nothing. But the porch light bulb was loose the next morning, quarter turn counterclockwise. The same adjustment, the same precision. Done while the floodlight was off between activations, or done in a way that didn't trigger the motion sensor, or done by someone who understood the sensor's field and knew how to approach the fixture from outside its range. The camera showed nothing. The floodlight caught nothing. The porch light was loosened by a hand that left no evidence of its presence, except the absence of light and a pair of size 12 boot prints that the rain had washed from the flower bed by morning. I still leave the porch light on. I still check it every morning and tighten it when it needs tightening, which is more often than I want to admit. I've replaced the bulb with an LED that screws in tighter and requires more force to loosen. And some mornings it's fine and some mornings it isn't. And the mornings when it isn't are the mornings when I stand on my porch in the early light and look at the tree line and the road and the empty turnaround, and I wonder where they go. Where does a person walk to at midnight on a mountain road with no streetlights and no houses past mine and nothing beyond the turnaround but the mountain and the woods? I don't know who is unscrewing my porch light. I don't know why they want it off. I don't know what the darkness looks like from their side, what they see when the light goes out and my house becomes invisible, and the boundary between my space and theirs dissolves into a blackness that treats us both equally. But I remember the hand, the steadiness of it, the patience, the slow, deliberate rotation of fingers that knew exactly how much force to apply and exactly how far to turn and exactly when to stop. It wasn't the hand of someone who was pranking me or testing me or trying to scare me into moving. It was the hand of someone who wanted the dark, who needed it, who came up the road on foot, walked to my porch, and removed the only light that stood between the inside of my house and whatever waited at the edge of the yard, and who did it with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for a long time. Longer, maybe, than I've been living here. I asked the Stillners about it once. Edna Stillner was on her porch when I drove past, and I stopped and asked, as casually as I could manage, if they'd ever had trouble with their porch light. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, not surprise, not concern, something older than both. She said, "We don't leave ours on at night." I asked her why not. She looked down the road toward my house and then back at me and said, "Because it draws attention." She went inside after that. She didn't elaborate. I drove home and checked my porch light. It was on. It was tight. But I stood there on the porch, looking at the fixture, looking at the bulb, and I thought about what Edna had said. It draws attention. Not from the road, not from neighbors, from something else. Something that walks up a dead-end road in the dark, on foot, in size 12 boots, and stands on a stranger's porch and removes the only light with the calm, methodical patience of someone who has been doing this long before I moved in. And I wondered for the first time, standing on my porch in the daylight, whether the porch light going off 3 times that Thursday night wasn't someone trying to get in. Maybe it was someone trying to make sure nothing else could see the way. The house was a split-level ranch on Piney Creek Road, about 4 miles south of Beckley, West Virginia, set back from the road on a lot that was mostly hillside and scrub oak. It had been built in 1978 by a contractor who'd done the work himself, which meant it was solid where it needed to be, and strange where it didn't. The kitchen was slightly lower than the living room, connected by a single step that my wife tripped on at least once a week for the first year we lived there. And the garage was attached to the house through a breezeway that the builder had enclosed at some point, creating a narrow, windowless hallway that connected the laundry room to the side entrance. The house had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a basement that ran the full footprint of the main level, accessible through a door at the end of the kitchen hallway. It was a house that had been functional and unremarkable for most of its life, and it might have stayed that way if the previous owner hadn't died in it. His name was Gerald Posey. He'd lived in the house alone for the last 12 years of his life, after his wife passed from a stroke and his children moved to different states, and the world around him contracted to the dimensions of 3 bedrooms and a yard. He stopped mowing sometime around 2015. He died in the living room, in a recliner that faced the television, on a Thursday in November of 2019. The coroner said heart failure. The neighbors said it had been at least 4 days before anyone noticed. The real estate disclosure said death on premises, which in West Virginia means the seller has to tell you and the buyer has to decide whether they care. Most people cared enough to keep looking. We didn't. We were 2 years married, priced out of everything in Beckley proper, and the house on Piney Creek was $30,000 below comparable properties, because Gerald Posey had died in the room where we planned to put the couch. We bought it in the spring of 2020 and spent 2 weeks cleaning before we moved in. The house wasn't in bad shape. Gerald had been a tidy man, even in his declining years, but there's a specific kind of staleness that accumulates in a house where someone has lived alone for a long time and then stopped living entirely. It's not dirt, it's not decay, it's the atmospheric residue of a person, the invisible film that a human life deposits on the surfaces it occupies. And when the person is gone, the residue remains like a watermark on paper. We scrubbed and painted and replaced the carpet and opened every window, and within a month the house felt like ours. The step between the kitchen and the living room became a joke. The breezeway became a storage area for shoes and coats. The basement became the place we put the things we didn't have room for upstairs. The basement was unfinished concrete floor, block walls, exposed joists, the standard anatomy of a below-grade space in a house that was built during a decade when basements were for utilities and storage and nothing else. It held the furnace, the water heater, the electrical panel, and whatever Gerald Posey had been keeping down there for the past 40 years. We'd cleared most of his things during the initial cleanup boxes of old magazines, a broken dehumidifier, a collection of hand tools that my wife's father was happy to take off our hands. What remained was our holiday decorations, surplus kitchen equipment, the accumulated overflow of 2 lives being compressed into a house that was slightly smaller than what we'd left. The basement door was at the end of the kitchen hallway, past the pantry, in a spot that was technically the deepest interior point of the house, the place furthest from every window and exterior wall, the geographic center of the structure. The door was solid wood, painted white, with a brass knob and a sliding bolt lock mounted on the kitchen side at about shoulder height. The bolt was a simple mechanism, a flat metal bar that slid into a bracket on the door frame, securing the door from the hallway side. It couldn't be operated from the basement side. That was the point. It was a lock that kept things on one side from getting to the other. I kept the bolt latched, not for any specific reason. We didn't have children, didn't have pets that might wander down the stairs, didn't have a security concern that required the basement to be locked. It was habit. The bolt was there, and sliding it shut after coming up from the basement was a natural gesture. The way closing a gate behind you is natural even when there's nothing on the other side that needs to be contained. I latched it every time, and over the 2 years we'd lived in the house, the bolt had never been anything other than a piece of hardware that did what it was supposed to do. My wife, Karen, left on a Wednesday morning in late January, to visit her mother in Lewisburg. Her mother had been having health issues, nothing critical, but the kind of slowly accumulating problems that required a daughter's presence more than a doctor's. Karen planned to be gone until Sunday. 4 nights alone in the house, which should have been unremarkable. I'd been alone in plenty of houses. I'd spent my 20s in apartments and rental rooms, where solitude was the default condition. Being alone in a building didn't bother me, or it hadn't, until the house on Piney Creek Road. The first night was fine. Wednesday. I came home from work, heated up leftovers, watched television. The house was quiet in the way. Houses are quiet when the person who usually fills them with sound is absent, not silent, but reduced. The ambient noise level dropped by half. I could hear things I normally didn't notice. The furnace cycling, the refrigerator humming, the specific creak that the house made when the temperature dropped and the wood contracted, a sound like a knuckle popping, recurring every 20 or 30 minutes as the night settled in. I went to bed around 11, slept fine, woke up Thursday, went to work, came home, normal. Thursday night is when it started. I was on the couch watching television around midnight. Not late by my standards, Karen and I usually stayed up until 11 or 12. And without her there, I drifted later into the evening the way you do when nobody's keeping the schedule with you. The house was dark except for the television. The kitchen was behind me, separated by the step, and the hallway that led to the basement door was beyond the kitchen, out of sight from where I sat. The volume on the TV was moderate, loud enough to hear the dialogue, quiet enough that I could hear the house if the house had anything to say. It did. The sound came from the hallway. Not a crash, not a bang, not the sudden dramatic noise that justifies jumping off the couch and calling someone. It was the sound of the bolt sliding, the metal bar being drawn back through the bracket, a smooth, even motion that produced a low, continuous scrape, the sound of steel on steel, deliberate and controlled, not the rattle of a loose bolt vibrating in a draft, not the click of a mechanism releasing under pressure, the sound of a hand, a force, a directed intention pulling the bolt from its locked position to its open position with the slow, measured control of someone who had done it before and knew exactly how much force it required. I muted the television. The remote was in my hand, and the mute button was pressed before my conscious mind had finished processing what I'd heard. The living room went silent. The house was silent, and in that silence, I felt the cold. It came from the direction of the hallway. Not a draft, this was thicker than a draft. Heavier, the kind of cold that pools and spreads like water, rather than the kind that cuts and passes. It was the air from the basement, 60-degree air, damp and still, carrying the mineral smell of concrete and the faint chemical trace of the furnace pushing through the open door and flowing down the hallway and into the kitchen and reaching me on the couch as a slow, spreading chill that I felt first on my ankles, and then on my hands, and then on the back of my neck. The door was open. I knew it without seeing it, the way you know a window is open in a house by the change in air pressure and temperature, long before you find which one. The basement door, which I had bolted that evening after retrieving a can of tomatoes from the storage shelf downstairs, was open. The bolt that could only be operated from the kitchen side had been drawn back, and the cold air from below was rising into the house with the patient inevitability of something that had been waiting for the barrier to be removed. I got up. I picked up the flashlight from the side table. I kept one there because the power on Piney Creek went out 3 or 4 times a year, and I'd learned to have a light within reach and walk to the kitchen. The step between the living room and the kitchen felt higher in the dark, the way familiar things feel unfamiliar when the context around them changes. I crossed the kitchen floor and stopped at the entrance to the hallway. The basement door was open, about 3 inches. The bolt was fully retracted, pushed all the way to the left, the metal bar withdrawn from the bracket, the mechanism in the same position it would be in if I'd opened it myself. The door hung slightly ajar, the gap between the door and the frame a dark vertical line that I could feel more than see, a seam of cold air and deeper darkness in a hallway that was already dark. I shone the flashlight through the gap. The beam cut down the basement stairs, steep, narrow, the standard open tread staircase of a 1,978 ranch, and hit the concrete floor 12 steps below. The basement was visible in the flashlight's cone, the near wall, the base of the stairs, the edge of the furnace, a corner of the storage shelving. Everything was still. Nothing moved. Nothing was visible that shouldn't have been. Hello? I said it because it's what you say, even when you know nobody is going to answer. even when the rational part of your brain has already identified the scenario as one in which speaking is either pointless or inadvisable. You say hello because not saying it means admitting that you're afraid, and admitting fear in your own house, in your own hallway, in front of a door that you locked and something else unlocked. That admission changes the rules of the space you're standing in. Nobody answered. The basement was silent except for the low, steady hum of the furnace and the distant tick of the water heater. I closed the door. I slid the bolt. I pushed it firmly into the bracket and held it there for a moment, feeling the metal seated in its housing, feeling the resistance that told me the lock was engaged. The bolt was tight. The mechanism was solid. The door was secured from the hallway side, and nothing on the basement side could reach the bolt, because the bolt was 6 inches above the knob on the opposite face of the door, in a position that required a hand on the hallway side to operate. I went back to the couch. I didn't turn the television off. I turned the volume up, not loud, just enough to fill the living room with sound that wasn't the sound of a house being quiet in the wrong way. I sat there and I watched the screen without seeing it, and I told myself the things you tell yourself when something has happened that doesn't make sense. The bolt was old. The bracket was loose. The mechanism had vibrated open. The furnace could have done it. The settling of the house, a shift in air pressure from the basement. Bolts slide sometimes. Doors open. It was a house, not a locked room in a mystery novel. Houses move. An hour passed, maybe a little more. The television played. The furnace cycled. The house ticked and creaked in its usual rhythms, and nothing unusual happened. And I started to feel the specific kind of foolish that comes from having been afraid of something that turned out to be nothing. Then I heard it again. The bolt, sliding. The same smooth, deliberate motion. The same scrape of metal on metal, drawn out over maybe 2 seconds, slow enough to be controlled, fast enough to be purposeful. Not a vibration, not a shift. A deliberate, complete retraction of the bolt from its bracket, performed by something that was standing on the hallway side of the door, my side, the kitchen side, the side that I was supposedly the only occupant of. Except I was on the couch, 20 feet away, in the living room, and the bolt was being opened by something that was in the hallway. I didn't get up. I want to explain why, but the truth is that I can't, not fully. It wasn't courage, I had none. It wasn't curiosity, I had less than none. It was paralysis of a specific kind, the kind that comes when the body's threat response system receives 2 contradictory commands simultaneously. One command said move, investigate, confront whatever is in your hallway, opening a door that only opens from your side. The other command said don't move, don't go into that hallway, don't walk toward whatever is standing between you and the basement with its hands on a bolt that it isn't supposed to be able to reach. The second command won. I sat on the couch with the remote in my hand and the television murmuring, and I listened to the cold air come again. The same slow spread, the same pooling chill, the same basement-scented current pushing through the hallway and into the kitchen, and reaching me with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. The door was open, again. The bolt was retracted, again. And I was sitting in my living room, in my house, in the dark, listening to something I could not see, and could not explain, and could not stop. I didn't close it this time. I didn't get off the couch. I sat there for the rest of the night with the television on, and my eyes on the hallway entrance, and the cold air from the basement wrapping itself around my ankles and climbing slowly up my legs, and I waited for something to come through that door and up those stairs and into the hallway where the bolt had been drawn back by a hand that operated from a side of the door where no hand should have been. Nothing came, nothing that I saw anyway. The hallway stayed dark, the basement stayed silent. The cold air flowed and pooled and filled the ground floor of the house with a chill that the furnace couldn't overcome, as if the basement had expanded, as if the underground space had grown during the night and was now breathing its air into my house without resistance. Morning came. Gray light through the windows, the ordinary mercy of a winter sunrise, the house resolving from a collection of sounds and shadows into a building I recognized. I got up stiff, cold, aching from 6 hours of not moving, and walked to the hallway. The door was open, not 3 inches this time, all the way, flat against the hallway wall, as if it had been pushed back to its full extent. The bolt was retracted. The stairs descended into the basement, which was now lit by the pale gray light that came through the small windows near the ceiling. I could see the whole space furnace, water heater, shelving, boxes, everything in its place, nothing disturbed. Nothing present that shouldn't have been. I closed the door. I slid the bolt. I drove to the hardware store in Beckley and bought a padlock and a hasp. And that afternoon, I installed them on the basement door, a secondary lock, independent of the bolt, requiring a key that I kept on my keychain. I locked the door with both the bolt and the padlock, and I tested them, and they held. Karen came home Sunday. I didn't tell her what had happened. I told her I'd installed the padlock because the bolt was loose, and I wanted extra security while she was gone. She accepted this without question, the way you accept explanations that are plausible enough to not require scrutiny. The bolt has not opened on its own since I installed the padlock. The door has stayed closed. The basement has remained what it was before, a concrete room below the house, holding a furnace and a water heater and boxes of things we don't use often enough to keep upstairs. Nothing has changed. But some nights, when Karen is asleep and the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed listening to the furnace cycle and the water heater tick and the wood contract in the cold, I hear something from the direction of the hallway, from behind the door. A sound so faint it might be imagination, might be the house settling, might be the padlock shifting against the hasp as the temperature changes. It sounds like a hand on a bolt, testing it, feeling the resistance of the padlock on the other side, trying the mechanism the way you try a door you used to be able to open, slowly, patiently, checking whether the new obstacle is permanent or temporary. And sometimes, not always, not every night, but sometimes I hear something else, from below the door, from the basement side. A sound I first heard on a Thursday night in January when I was alone in a house where a man died alone 12 years after his wife passed, and the world around him shrank to the size of 3 bedrooms and a door that someone kept locked from the other side. Breathing, slow, measured, coming from the bottom of the stairs. Not angry, not threatening, just there, waiting at a door that used to open, patient with the lock the way it was patient with everything else in this house, which is to say infinitely, which is to say, with the specific endurance of something that has been in this basement longer than I've been in this house and will be here after I'm gone. I don't go down those stairs alone anymore. When something needs to be retrieved from the basement, a decoration, a tool, a can of tomatoes, Karen goes with me, or I wait until she's available. She thinks it's endearing. She thinks I'm being companionable, seeking her company for a task that doesn't require 2 people. She doesn't know that I need her there because the sound of 2 sets of footsteps on those stairs is different from the sound of one. Because whatever is in the basement distinguishes between a person alone and a person accompanied. Because the door has never opened when Karen is in the house. Only when I'm alone. Only at night. Only when the house is quiet enough for me to hear the bolt slide and the cold air rise and the breathing at the bottom of the stairs. That sounds like a man who lived alone in this house for 12 years and died in the room where I watched television and was found 4 days later by someone who noticed the absence, the way you notice a light going out, not immediately, not urgently, but eventually. The way the world notices anything, which is too late. Gerald Posey died alone in this house. And I think, on the nights when the bolt slides and the door opens and the cold air pushes up from below, that some part of what was left behind doesn't know that. Some part is still here, still moving through the spaces it occupied for 40 years, still opening the door that leads upstairs, because upstairs is where the living room is and the television is, and the recliner that faced the screen where a man sat every evening until the evening he didn't get up. The padlock holds, the bolt holds, the door stays closed, but the breathing continues, and the hand on the bolt continues. And some nights I lie in bed and listen to the house, and I think about Gerald Posey, alone at the bottom of those stairs, trying a lock that someone changed, patient as only the dead can be, waiting for the night when the mechanism gives, or the hasp fails, or the padlock rusts and the bolt slides free, and the door opens one more time onto the hallway of a house that still belongs to him in ways that a deed and a mortgage, 2 years of living, can't overwrite. And I wonder what he'd do if he made it up the stairs. If the door opened all the way, and the hallway was clear, and the living room was right there, the same room, the same walls, the same television, glowing in the dark. I think he'd sit down, in the recliner that isn't there anymore, in the room that's changed around him. I think he'd sit down and watch whatever's on the screen, and wait for someone to notice he's there. The way he waited the first time. 4 days. Alone. I don't think he wants to hurt anyone. I don't think that's what the bolt is about, or the breathing, or the cold air that rises from below. I think he just doesn't want to be alone anymore. and the door is the only way he knows how to say it. The apartment is on the second floor of a house that was built in 1927 on Valley Street in Abingdon, Virginia. The house was originally a single-family residence, a craftsman-style two-story, with a wide front porch and the kind of solid, overbuilt construction that people did in the 20s when lumber was cheap and labor was patient, and nobody was in a hurry to finish anything because there was nowhere else to be. At some point in the 70s, the house was divided into apartments. The first floor became one unit, the second floor became another, and the attic was sealed off and forgotten. The conversion was minimal. They added a kitchen upstairs by running plumbing through the floor from the first floor bathroom below. They installed a separate entrance at the back of the house, accessible by an exterior staircase that creaked and swayed in a way that made you question its structural integrity every time you used it. They put a lock on the door at the top of the interior staircase, so the two units were separate, and that was it. No soundproofing, no insulation between floors, no real acknowledgement that the building had been transformed from one thing into another. The bones were still a house, the function was apartments. The two facts coexisted uneasily. The way they always do in converted spaces, you could feel the house's original intention pushing through the modifications, the way a river pushes through a dam that's too small to hold it. I moved in during the summer of 2021. The apartment was affordable, which in Abingdon means it was cheap, and it was available, which in a small town with limited rental stock means it existed. The space was adequate: a living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a closet in the bedroom that was larger than it needed to be. The kind of deep, walk-in space that old houses have, because the people who built them understood that storage was not an afterthought. The walls were plaster, not drywall thick, solid. The kind of walls that hold temperature and sound differently than modern construction. The floors were hardwood under the carpet, the ceilings were 9 feet, and the windows were the original double-hung units with wavy glass that made the street outside look like it was underwater. It was a good apartment, quiet, private, the kind of place where you could disappear into your work for 10 hours and not be disturbed by anything except your own thoughts. I work remote software development for a company based in Richmond that I've never visited in person. My entire professional life exists inside a laptop screen, and my entire physical life exists inside this apartment. On a typical day, I'm at my desk by 8, and I don't leave the chair until 6, and the only sounds I hear are the keyboard, the occasional notification ping, and the ambient life of the building, the first floor tenant's television, which I could hear through the floor as a low, rhythmic murmur, and the house itself, which creaked and ticked and settled with the constant, low-grade restlessness of a structure that was almost 100 years old and had been standing in one place for longer than most people stay alive. I'd been in the apartment for 2 years without anything unusual happening. 2 years of the same routine, the same sounds, the same quiet. I knew the building's vocabulary as well as I knew my own. The floorboards in the hallway creaked in sequence, first the one near the bathroom, then the one outside the bedroom, then the one by the kitchen. The radiator in the living room ticked when it heated up and clanked when it cooled down. The exterior staircase groaned when the wind pushed it, and the back door rattled in its frame during storms. These were the sounds of existence, the auditory wallpaper of a life lived in a specific space, and I'd stopped hearing them the way you stop hearing your own breathing. The voice started on a Tuesday night in January. I remember the day because I'd been working late on a deadline, had eaten dinner at my desk, and had gone to bed later than usual around midnight instead of my typical 10:30. The apartment was dark. The radiator was off, the building was quiet, and the only sound was the faint traffic on Valley Street, which in Abingdon at midnight means a car every 5 or 10 minutes, headlights sweeping across the ceiling as they pass. I fell asleep quickly. I was tired in the specific, bone-deep way that screen work makes you tired, not physical exhaustion, but neural exhaustion, the feeling of a brain that has been processing information for 14 hours and wants to stop. Sleep came fast and was, for the first hour or so, deep and dreamless. I woke up at 2:07 a.m. I know the time because the first thing I did was look at my phone, which was charging on the nightstand, and showed the time in large white numbers on its lock screen. I didn't wake up gradually. I was pulled out of sleep by a sound that my brain classified as wrong before I was conscious enough to identify it. The way a smoke detector pulls you awake, not because of the volume, but because of the wrongness, the sound that doesn't belong in the vocabulary of your sleeping environment. Someone was speaking, not whispering, not murmuring, speaking at a normal conversational volume, the kind of volume you'd use if you were sitting across a table from someone and having a discussion. The voice was female. The tone was calm, measured, even, not agitated, not emotional, not performing. It was the voice of a woman in the middle of a conversation that had been going on for a while and would continue for a while longer. The steady, unhurried cadence of someone who had something to say and was taking her time saying it. It was coming from my bedroom closet. The closet was on the east wall of the bedroom, about 8 feet from the bed. The door was a 6-panel wooden door, painted white, with a brass knob. I kept it closed at night, not for any particular reason, just the habit of a person who likes things closed that are supposed to be closed. The voice was coming from behind that door. Not muffled, not distant, present, clear, as if the speaker were standing inside the closet, facing the door, speaking at a volume intended to be heard by someone on the other side. But I couldn't understand the words. This was the part that made the hair on my arms stand up and the air in my lungs turn to something thick and cold. The voice had all the characteristics of speech, the rhythm, the pacing, the rises and falls of natural conversation. I could hear consonants and vowels, the building blocks of language, assembled into sequences that sounded like sentences. There were pauses where sentences would pause. There were inflections where questions would inflect. The voice was using language. It was speaking in what sounded like English, or something shaped like English, with the cadence and musicality of a person who was fluent in whatever they were saying. But the words themselves were just below the threshold of comprehension. Like listening to someone speak in a room on the other side of a wall, you can hear the voice, you can detect the pattern, you can tell that meaning is being communicated, but the specific content slips away before your brain can lock onto it. I'd catch what sounded like the beginning of a word, and then the rest of it would dissolve into the next sound, and the sentence would continue without ever delivering a complete unit of meaning. I lay in bed and listened, for 10 minutes. Maybe longer. Time loses its structure when you're lying in the dark listening to an impossible voice. The voice didn't stop. It didn't pause for longer than a natural conversational beat. It didn't change in volume or tone or pace. It continued with the steady, unbroken output of someone who was speaking to a listener, maintaining the rhythm of dialogue without the other half of the conversation. I should have gotten up immediately. I should have turned on the light, crossed the room, and opened the closet door. That's what a rational person does when they hear a sound they can't explain. They investigate. They find the source. They either identify a mundane explanation or they confirm that something genuinely unusual is happening, and then they deal with it. But I didn't move. Not because I was afraid, not yet, not consciously. Because some part of me, some instinct that operates below the level of rational thought, understood that the voice in the closet was not a sound that investigation would resolve, that opening the door would not produce an answer, that whatever was speaking in a way that existed specifically to be heard through a closed door, and that opening the door would change the conditions in a way that the voice did not want. I got up anyway. Eventually, after the 10 minutes or the 20 minutes or however long I lay there, I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and stood. The floor was cold through my socks. The room was dark except for the pale light from the street that came through the window. The voice continued, uninterrupted by my movement, unaffected by the creak of the bed or the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood. I walked to the closet. I stood in front of the door. The voice was right there, inches from me, separated by a panel of painted wood that was the only barrier between the sound and the silence it would leave behind. I could feel it in my chest, the vibration of a human voice at close range, the physical resonance that you feel when someone is speaking near you. The voice was real. It was not in my head, not a dream artifact, not the auditory hallucination of a tired brain. It was a sound produced by a source, traveling through air, hitting my eardrums, and being processed by a brain that couldn't identify the words, but could identify everything else about them. I reached for the knob. I turned it. I pulled the door open. The voice stopped, not faded, not trailed off, stopped, instantaneously, completely, as if someone had pressed a mute button. The silence that followed was so total, it had its own sound, a ringing, a pressure, the auditory equivalent of the afterimage you see when a bright light is suddenly removed. The closet was empty. My clothes hung on the rod. My shoes were on the floor. A box of old tax returns sat in the corner where I'd put it when I moved in. The walls were plaster, solid, painted the same off-white as the rest of the apartment. The ceiling was intact. The floor was hardwood, no gaps, no openings, no access to anything beneath. I checked everything. I pressed my hands against the walls, feeling for warmth, for vibration, for any indication that the sound had come from somewhere beyond the plaster. I knocked on the surfaces, listening for hollow spots. I got on my knees and examined the floor, looking for vents or gaps or anything that might transmit sound from the apartment below or from the sealed attic above. I found nothing. The closet was a rectangular box of plaster and wood, enclosed on all sides, containing clothes and shoes, and the specific silence of a space where something had been speaking moments ago and was now not. I left the door open. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. The next night, Wednesday, I was awake at 2 a.m., not because I'd set an alarm, because my body had decided, without consulting my conscious mind, that 2 a.m. was now a time that required vigilance. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, facing the closet, which I had left open this time. The door was flat against the wall, the interior visible in the faint light from the street. Clothes, shoes, box, nothing else. At 2:11 a.m., the voice started. Same voice, same tone, same calm, conversational cadence, same incomprehensible words, hovering at the edge of meaning, the sounds of language without the substance. It came from the closet, from the back of the closet, from the wall, from a source that I was looking directly at and could not see. The closet was open. The door was against the wall. There was nothing inside that could produce a human voice. And yet the voice was there, speaking into my bedroom with the unhurried patience of someone who had been talking for a long time before I started listening and would continue long after I stopped. I got up. I walked to the closet. I stood at the threshold and I listened. The voice was clearer here, still incomprehensible, still below the line where sound becomes language, but clearer. I could hear the texture of it. The voice was older than I'd initially thought. Not elderly, but mature, the voice of a woman in her 50s or 60s, with the slight roughness that comes from years of use. The voice of someone who has spoken a lot in her life and has worn the edges off the words. It was a kind voice. That's what struck me. Standing there in the dark, listening to something impossible. The voice was kind. It had warmth in it, patience, the quality of someone explaining something important to someone they cared about. The voice stopped when I stepped into the closet. Not when I opened the door was already open. It stopped when my foot crossed the threshold, when my body entered the space. As if my presence inside the closet disrupted whatever conditions allowed the voice to exist. As if the voice was meant to be heard from outside, from the bedroom, from the bed, and the closet was not the location of the speaker, but the location of the door through which the speaking passed. Thursday night. Same time, same voice. I didn't get up. I lay in bed with the closet door open, and I listened. The voice spoke for 45 minutes. I timed it on my phone. 45 minutes of steady, incomprehensible conversation. The cadence never breaking, the tone never shifting, the words never quite arriving. At 2:56 a.m., it stopped. Not gradually all at once. The bedroom went silent, and I lay there in the dark, and I felt the absence of the voice the way you feel the absence of a person who has left a room. The air was thinner, the space was emptier. Something that had been present was gone. Friday night, I slept on the couch. The voice didn't follow me. The living room was silent all night. The bedroom, as far as I could tell from the other room, was silent too. The voice was specific to the closet, specific to the night, specific to whatever frequency of darkness and solitude triggered it. When I was in the bedroom, it spoke. When I wasn't, it didn't. I slept on the couch for a week, then 2 weeks, then a month. The bedroom became a room I entered during the day and avoided after dark. I moved my alarm clock to the living room. I kept my phone charger by the couch. I adapted my life around a voice that I'd only heard on 3 consecutive nights, but that had changed the geography of my apartment so fundamentally that an entire room had become uninhabitable after sunset. I told my landlord about it, not in terms of ghosts or voices, in terms of sound. I told him I was hearing something in the bedroom wall at night, possibly from the first floor unit, possibly from the attic. He sent a handyman who checked the walls and the floor and the ceiling and the attic access and found nothing. The first floor tenant, an older man named Bill who worked early shifts at the hospital and was asleep by 9 p.m. every night, said he hadn't heard anything and wasn't making any noise. The handyman suggested it might be animals in the walls, mice or squirrels, and set some traps in the attic. The traps caught nothing. The handyman came back, shrugged, and told me old houses make sounds. I went into the bedroom one more time at night. It was March by then. I'd been sleeping on the couch for 2 months, and some combination of frustration and the need to understand had overridden the part of me that knew better. I went in at 1:30 a.m. I sat on the bed. I waited. At 2:04 a.m., the voice started. From the closet, same voice, same cadence, same warm, patient, incomprehensible stream of almost words that my brain strained toward and couldn't reach. But this time, I heard something I hadn't heard before. A word. One single word, surfacing briefly from the current of sound like a stone becoming visible in moving water. It was there for a fraction of a second, and then it was gone, carried away by the continued flow of the voice, absorbed back into the unintelligible stream. The word was my name, not my full name. The shortened version. The version my mother used. The version that only people who knew me well would use. The familiar form. The intimate form, spoken in a tone that matched the warmth of the voice, not calling for me, not summoning me, just including me. Addressing me as part of whatever she was saying, the way you include someone's name in a conversation when you want them to know you're talking to them specifically, that the words are meant for them, that you see them, and you're speaking directly to their presence. I left the room. I closed the door. I haven't been back in the bedroom at night since. I still live in the apartment. The lease is affordable, and the location is convenient, and moving would require an explanation I'm not prepared to give. The bedroom is where I keep my clothes and my desk. I work there during the day. I sleep on the couch. The arrangement has become normal in the way that all arrangements become normal when you sustain them long enough. The body adapts, the routine calcifies, and the reason for the change recedes into the background of daily life until it becomes just another fact about the way you live. But I hear it sometimes. Not the voice, the silence that precedes it. Around 1:45 or 1:50 inches the morning, if I'm still awake on the couch, I can feel the apartment shift, not physically, atmospherically. The air in the bedroom changes. The quality of the darkness behind the closed door deepens, concentrating, preparing itself for something that happens every night, whether I'm listening or not. And I think about the voice, about who she is, about what she's saying, about the warmth in her tone and the patience in her cadence, and the way she said my name as if she knew me, as if she'd known me for a long time, as if the conversation she's been having every night at 2 a.m. in my bedroom closet is a conversation she's been having with me, even when I'm not there to hear it. I looked up the history of the house once. The original owners were a couple named Hazelwood James and Virginia. They lived here from 1927 until Virginia died in 1969. James followed her 3 years later. The house was sold, divided, rented, resold. The usual trajectory of a building that outlives the people who built it. Virginia Hazelwood died in this house, on the second floor, in the room that is now my bedroom. She was 63 years old, and she died of pneumonia. And the obituary in the Washington County News said she was survived by her husband and 3 children, and was known for her kindness and her patience, and the way she could talk to anyone about anything and make them feel like the only person in the room. I don't know if the voice is hers. I don't know if voices belong to people after the people are gone, or if houses remember the sounds that were made in them, or if the walls and the closets and the plaster absorb the vibrations of a life lived in a specific space and release them back into the dark when the conditions are right. I don't know any of that, but I know the voice is kind, and I know it says my name. And I know that whatever Virginia Hazelwood was saying to whoever she was speaking to, in whatever conversation has been continuing in that closet for however many years, she's not trying to scare me. She's trying to tell me something. And the words are almost there, just below the surface, just past the edge of what I can hear. One day, maybe, if I listen long enough, if I sit on that bed at 2 a.m. and let the voice wash over me without flinching, I'll hear it. The full sentence. The complete thought. The thing she's been saying every night to an empty room in a house she built with her husband in 1927. I'm not ready for that yet. I don't know if I ever will be. But the voice will be there when I am. It's patient, it's kind, and it knows my name. I've been a light sleeper for as long as I can remember. My mother used to say I slept with one eye open, which wasn't true literally, but captured something about the way my body relates to unconsciousness. I don't surrender to sleep the way most people do. I negotiate with it. I go under in stages, each one shallow enough that the wrong sound, the wrong vibration, the wrong shift in air pressure will pull me back to full awareness in the time it takes to draw a breath. The sound doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be dramatic. A faucet dripping in the bathroom will do it. The furnace clicking on. A car door closing on the street outside. My body monitors the environment while I sleep, the way a security system monitors a building passively, continuously, and with a trigger sensitivity that can't be adjusted downward no matter how much I'd like it to be. This is relevant because of what I heard on October 14th, and because understanding how I heard it requires understanding that I don't miss sounds. Not in my house, not at night, not the kind of sounds that matter. The house is a 2-bedroom frame structure on Cove Creek Road, about 7 miles outside of Wytheville, Virginia. It sits on 2 acres of wooded land at the end of a gravel driveway that's long enough, maybe 150 yards, to feel like a buffer between the house and the road. The nearest neighbor is the Prater family, whose house is visible from my kitchen window as a distant porch light through the trees, about a quarter-mile northwest. Beyond the Praters, there's nothing in any direction except the mountains and the forest and the specific quality of darkness that rural Virginia produces when the last porch light goes out and the stars aren't enough to see by. I bought the house in 2019 after my divorce. It was a deliberate choice, not a retreat, but a repositioning. I'd spent 15 years in Blacksburg in a house that was always too close to the neighbors and too full of the kind of noise that comes from living in a town where other people's lives are an unavoidable soundtrack. After the divorce, I wanted distance. Physical distance, emotional distance, the kind of distance that can only be measured in the length of a driveway and the thickness of the trees between your property and the nearest set of eyes. Cove Creek gave me that. The house was small, affordable, and isolated enough that I could go an entire weekend without seeing another human being if I wanted to. Most weekends, I wanted to. I live alone. I work at a distribution center in Wytheville warehouse management, the kind of job that runs on schedules and systems and the predictable repetition of things moving from one place to another. I leave for work at 6 in the morning and get home by 4 in the afternoon. My evenings are quiet. Dinner, television, reading, bed by 10. The routine is not exciting, and I don't need it to be. Excitement is what I had in my 30s. In my 40s, I have peace, and peace requires routine, and routine requires a house that behaves the same way every night without variation. My house behaves the same way every night. The floors creak in specific places. The hallway has a board near the bathroom that groans under any weight, and the kitchen floor has a spot by the back door that pops when the temperature drops. The back door itself has a particular sound. When it closes, the latch is a standard residential latch, the kind with a spring-loaded bolt that clicks into the strike plate when the door meets the frame. If you close the door at normal speed, the click is sharp and definitive. If you close it slowly, easing it shut, controlling the speed so the latch slides into the plate rather than snapping, the sound is softer, a whisper instead of a word. A sound you'd only hear if you were listening for it, or if your body was the kind that listens for everything whether you want it to or not. I know that sound. I know the difference between the sharp click and the soft one. I know the difference between a door closing because the wind pushed it and a door closing because a hand pulled it. I've lived in this house for 5 years. I know every sound it makes, the way I know the sound of my own voice. On October 14th, a Tuesday, I went to bed at my usual time, 10 o'clock. The house was locked, front door deadbolted, back door deadbolted, windows latched. I checked them the way I check them every night, in the same order, with the same routine. Front door, back door, kitchen window, bathroom window, bedroom window. The house was sealed. The lights were off except for the small lamp on my nightstand, which I turned off after reading for about 20 minutes. The bedroom was dark. The house was dark. The world outside was dark in the way that Cove Creek is dark in October, complete, unbroken, the kind of darkness that the mountains create when they block the horizon and the trees block the sky, and there is nothing between you and the night except the walls of the place you live in. I fell asleep around 10:30. Sleep came in its usual stages, the light doze, the gradual deepening, the slow surrender of consciousness to the body's demand for rest. My mind went quiet. The house went quiet. The night settled over Cove Creek, the way it settles every night, with the weight and patience of something that has been doing this for a very long time. I woke at 3:17 a.m. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly. The way I always wake when a sound breaks, the pattern pulled from sleep like a cork from a bottle, fully conscious before my eyes were fully open. My heart was already elevated. My breathing was already shallow. My body had processed the sound before my mind was online, had classified it as significant, had initiated the alert response, and was waiting for my conscious self to catch up and decide what to do about it. The sound was the back door closing. The soft version, the ease-shut version, the latch sliding into the strike plate with a controlled, deliberate motion that minimized the sound, but didn't eliminate it. It was the sound of a door being closed by someone who knew that doors make noise and was taking steps to reduce it. Someone who cared about being quiet. Someone who didn't want to be heard. I lay in bed. My bedroom is at the front of the house, maybe 30 feet from the kitchen and the back door. The hallway connects them, a straight shot, no turns, bedroom door to kitchen to back door. The hallway floor is hardwood, original to the house, varnished and smooth. Sound travels well on that surface. Footsteps are particularly clear. The floor acts as a resonator, amplifying the contact between foot and wood, broadcasting the sound through the house with a fidelity that I'd always appreciated because it meant I could hear anyone moving through my home from any room. I heard footsteps. They started in the kitchen, near the back door, and they moved toward me, down the hallway, toward my bedroom. They were not the footsteps of shoes, no hard heel strike, no leather or rubber sole meeting wood. They were not the footsteps of socks, no fabric whisper, no muffled contact. They were bare feet, skin on varnished wood, the soft, slightly adhesive sound that a bare foot makes on a hard, smooth surface, the subtle stick and release of skin lifting from varnish, the sound of toes pressing and releasing, the organic rhythm of a human body walking on a floor that was built to be walked on by someone wearing shoes. The footsteps were slow, not cautious, deliberate. The pace of someone who was not in a hurry, not lost, not exploring. The pace of someone who knew the layout, who had walked this hallway before. Who knew how many steps it took to get from the back door to the bedroom and was covering that distance with the unhurried confidence of familiarity. They passed the kitchen table. I heard the faint creak of the floorboard near the refrigerator, the one I heard every morning when I walked to the coffee maker. They entered the hallway. The acoustics changed. The hallway is narrower than the kitchen, and the sound of footsteps in the hallway has a slightly compressed quality, a closeness, the feeling of sound being channeled toward you through a space that's designed to direct things from one end to the other. They stopped at my bedroom door. The door was open. I sleep with the bedroom door, open, always have. The same way I've always been a light sleeper, a personal preference that's hardened into habit through decades of repetition. The doorway was a dark rectangle in the dark wall, connecting my bedroom to the hallway that connected to the kitchen that connected to the back door through which someone had just entered my house. I could feel the presence. That sounds like something from a movie, like a dramatic description of an experience that's more internal than physical. But I mean it literally. I could feel it, the displaced air, the change in the room's acoustics that happens when an open doorway goes from empty to occupied, when a body fills the space where air used to flow freely, blocking the current, creating a pressure differential that you can detect on the surface of your skin if you're sensitive enough. Someone was standing in my doorway, not leaning, not moving, not breathing heavily, standing, still, the way a person stands when they've arrived where they intended to be and are now deciding what to do next. The baseball bat was under the bed, an aluminum Louisville Slugger that I'd kept there since I moved in, positioned with the handle facing outward so I could reach down in the dark and grab it without looking. It was there. I knew exactly where it was. My hand knew the motion: reach down, close fingers around the grip, pull it free, swing my legs off the bed, stand. I didn't move. I've thought about this every day since, and I still can't fully explain it. I was not asleep. I was not paralyzed. I was fully awake, fully aware, fully conscious of the fact that an unknown person was standing in the doorway of my bedroom at 3:17 inches the morning, having entered my locked house through a door that should not have opened. Every rational response was available to me: fight, flee, shout, call for help. The bat was under my hand. The phone was on the nightstand. My body was functional. My mind was clear. But something held me still. An instinct deeper than the ones that said fight or run. An instinct that said, don't move, don't speak. Don't acknowledge the presence in the doorway, because acknowledging it changes the interaction from observation to engagement. As long as I was still, as long as my breathing was slow and even, and indistinguishable from the breathing of a person deep in sleep, I was being watched. And being watched, in that moment, was safer than being confronted. I kept my eyes almost closed. Not shut, the lids were parted just enough to let in the faintest sliver of the darkness in the room. Not enough to see details, but enough to detect movement, to know if the shape in the doorway changed position or came closer. I breathed, slowly, deliberately, performing sleep with every cell in my body while my mind screamed at a frequency that only I could hear. The presence stayed for 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Time in that state doesn't move the way it moves on a clock. It stretches and compresses based on what you're feeling rather than what you're measuring. Long enough for me to become aware of something I hadn't noticed at first. The smell, faint, organic, carried on the displaced air that the person in the doorway was pushing into my room by the simple act of being there. It was the smell of outside, of earth, of leaves, of the cold metallic tang that October air carries in the mountains. The person standing in my doorway hadn't been inside for long. They'd come from outside, from the night, from somewhere in the darkness beyond my back door, and they'd brought the smell of that darkness with them into my house. Then the footsteps retreated, same pace, same deliberate, unhurried cadence, back through the hallway, past the kitchen table, across the kitchen floor. The latch clicked. The back door opened and closed with the same careful, controlled motion that had woken me. The soft version, the quiet version, the version that said, I know how this door works. I know how to use it without making a sound. Silence, total, absolute silence. The house was empty again. The air in the bedroom settled. The displaced current dissipated. The smell of outside faded. The night went back to being the night, and I lay in my bed with the bat under the bed and my hand at my side, and I didn't move for another hour. At 4:30, I got up. I turned on every light in the house. I checked the back door. It was locked. The deadbolt was engaged. The thumb turn on the interior side was in the locked position, fully rotated. The door was sealed, secured, in the same state I'd left it at 10 p.m. the night before when I'd made my rounds. I stood in the kitchen and stared at that door for a long time. The deadbolt was a standard residential model single-cylinder, key on the outside, thumb turn on the inside. Locking it from the inside required turning the thumb lever 90 degrees. Locking it from the outside required a key. I had the only key. It was on my keychain, which was on the hook by the front door, where it had been all night. The door was locked, as if nobody had come through it, as if the footsteps and the latch and the presence in my doorway were something my house had imagined, as if the deadbolt had been engaged the entire night and nothing had entered and nothing had left and the October air I'd smelled had come from nowhere. I checked the floor. The hallway hardwood was clean, dry, unmarked. No footprints, no mud, no indication that bare feet had walked from the back door to my bedroom and back. If someone had been outside in October, walking through the woods, crossing my property, approaching my back door, their feet would have carried evidence. Moisture, dirt, leaf residue, something. The floor showed nothing. I didn't go to work that day. I called in and spent the morning going over the house inch by inch. I checked every window, locked. I checked every door, locked. I checked the back door frame for signs of forced entry, no scratches, no warping, no indication that the lock had been picked or the frame had been compromised. I checked the crawl space under the house, access through a panel in the side skirting, empty. I checked the small attic space above the bedroom, empty. I walked the property, the yard, the driveway, the tree line behind the house. No footprints, no disturbances. The October leaves on the ground were undisturbed, layered and matted the way they'd been for weeks, showing no evidence of anyone walking through them toward my back door. I installed a security camera that weekend. A basic unit, motion activated, aimed at the back door from the kitchen ceiling. I installed a second one in the hallway. I bought a door reinforcement kit, a steel bar that braces against the floor and wedges under the doorknob, the kind of device designed to prevent a door from being opened even if the lock is defeated. I propped it against the back door every night before bed. 3 weeks passed. The cameras captured nothing. The bar stayed in place. The deadbolt stayed locked. I started sleeping again, not well, not deeply, but enough to function. The incident receded into the space where unexplained things go, when the world provides no explanation and the mind gets tired of searching for one. Then it happened again. A Saturday night, November. I was in bed by 11. The house was locked, the cameras were on, the bar was braced against the back door. I fell asleep around midnight. I woke at 3:22 a.m. to the sound of the latch, the soft click, the back door closing, footsteps, bare feet on hardwood, through the kitchen, down the hallway, stopping at my bedroom door. I lay still. I didn't breathe. I felt the presence in the doorway, the displaced air, the change in acoustics, the smell of outside, of October becoming November, of cold and leaves, and the specific darkness of Cove Creek at 3 a.m. 30 seconds, a minute. The footsteps retreated. The latch clicked. The door opened and closed. Silence. I got up immediately this time. I went to the back door. The steel reinforcement bar was still in place, wedged under the knob, braced against the floor, in the exact position I'd placed it before bed. The deadbolt was engaged. The door was locked, barred, and sealed. I checked the cameras. I pulled the SD cards and reviewed the footage on my laptop at the kitchen table, with the lights on and a cup of coffee in my hand. The kitchen camera showed my kitchen, empty and undisturbed, from 11 p.m. to the current time. No movement, no figure, no door opening. The hallway camera showed my hallway, empty and undisturbed, for the same period. No one walked through it. No one stood in my bedroom doorway. But I heard it. My body heard it. The latch, the footsteps, the presence, the retreat, the latch again. The same sequence, the same pace, the same unhurried deliberateness. Either something walked through my house that the cameras couldn't see, or the house was playing back a sound that had been made before, a recording embedded in the wood and the air and the architecture, triggered by conditions I couldn't identify and replayed with a fidelity that my sleeping body couldn't distinguish from the real thing. It's happened 4 more times since then, always between 3 and 3:30 a.m. Always the same sequence, the latch, the footsteps, the stop at my doorway, the retreat, the latch, always when I'm alone. The cameras have never captured anything. The locks are always engaged. The bar is always in place. The floors are always clean. I've stopped checking the cameras. I've stopped checking the locks. I know what I'll find, the same nothing, the same locked door, the same empty footage. Whatever walks through my house at 3 a.m. doesn't interact with locks or cameras or steel reinforcement bars. It walks through them, or around them, or in a version of my house that exists slightly to the left of the one I can see and touch. I've started leaving the bedroom door closed. Not because I think it'll stop the footsteps they stop at the doorway, whether it's open or closed, as if the threshold is a boundary that the walker has chosen not to cross rather than one they can't. I close the door because I don't want to feel the presence. The displaced air, the smell of outside, of Cove Creek at night, of the woods and the darkness, and whatever is in them that knows where my back door is and how to close it quietly, and how many steps it takes to reach my bedroom. The door stays closed. The footsteps still come. They stop at the door and they stand there for 30 seconds, or a minute, or however long it takes, for whatever purpose the visit serves to be fulfilled, and then they walk away, back through the hallway, back through the kitchen. The latch clicks, the house goes quiet, and I lie in bed with my eyes closed and my hand not reaching for the bat, and I wait for the silence to settle back into something I can sleep in. And I think about the footsteps, bare feet, slow and deliberate, walking through a locked house with the confidence of someone who lives here, who has always lived here. And I think about the thing that scares me most, which isn't the sound or the presence or the locked door that somehow opens and closes without being unlocked. The thing that scares me is the pause, the 30 seconds at my doorway, the stillness, the standing, because it doesn't feel like surveillance. It doesn't feel like threat assessment. It doesn't feel like the behavior of someone deciding whether to come in. It feels like checking, the way a parent checks on a sleeping child, the way you open a door and look at someone who's resting and confirm that they're there and they're breathing and they're safe. And then you close the door and you go back the way you came and you leave them to their sleep. Whatever walks through my house at 3 a.m., whatever opens a locked door and crosses a barred threshold and walks on bare feet down a hallway that the cameras insist is empty, it stops at my bedroom door and it checks on me, and then it leaves. And I don't know if that makes it better or worse. I don't know if being watched over is different from being watched. I don't know if the thing that stands in my doorway every few weeks is protecting me or studying me or just doing what it's always done, walking the route it's always walked, checking the room it's always checked, in a house that it occupied long before I arrived, and will occupy long after I'm gone. I just know the footsteps come, and the latch clicks, and the back door opens and closes without being unlocked. And some nights, when the footsteps stop at my door, and the silence stretches and the presence fills the doorway, like a held breath, I almost open my eyes, almost look, almost see what's standing there, checking on me, making sure I'm still in the bed, still breathing, still asleep in a house on Cove Creek Road where the darkness is total, and the nearest light is a quarter-mile away, and the night has a patience that I'm only beginning to understand. Almost. But I keep my eyes closed, because some things are easier to live with when they stay on the other side of the dark, and whatever's in my doorway seems to agree. It stands there, it checks, and then it goes, and the door stays locked, as if it was never opened, as if nothing was ever there at all. My house sits in the middle of 60 acres of hardwood forest in McDowell County, West Virginia, at the end of a road that the county stopped maintaining about 15 years ago. The pavement ends about 2 miles before my driveway, and from there it's gravel packed and graded in the summer, rutted and unpredictable the rest of the year, the kind of surface that your truck learns to navigate the way a horse learns a trail. The driveway itself is another quarter-mile through the trees, winding around the base of a ridge before opening into a small, cleared area where the house and the outbuildings sit in a space that feels less like a clearing and more like a pause in the forest's attention. The trees are close, tulip poplars and red oaks and the occasional hemlock, their trunks starting maybe 20 feet from the walls of the house on the east and south sides, and closer than that on the north, where a stand of old maples has been leaning toward the building for decades, their branches reaching across the gap between the tree line and the roof like arms extended, in a gesture that could be either embrace or reach. I built the house myself in 2011 with my brother Jeff and a friend named Kessler, who knew more about framing than either of us did and was willing to work for beer and the promise that he could hunt the property whenever he wanted. It's a simple structure, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room joined by a half wall, a covered porch on the front that faces the driveway and the gap in the trees where you can see a slice of the valley below. The construction is standard stick frame, vinyl siding, double pane windows, nothing fancy, nothing fragile. It's a house built to exist in the woods, to withstand the things the woods do to it, and the things the woods do are constant. Branches scrape the siding during storms. Leaves clog the gutters every autumn with a persistence that suggests intentional sabotage. Pollen coats the windows in spring. Acorns hit the roof in fall, with the percussive regularity of rain on a tin drum. The forest is always touching the house, always reaching for it, always reminding it that the clearing it sits in is borrowed space, and the trees that surround it remember what was there before. I'm used to these sounds. After 13 years of living in the woods, the vocabulary of the forest against my house is as familiar as conversation. I can tell the difference between a branch scraping the siding and a squirrel running across the roof. I can tell when the wind is pushing the trees toward the house and when the trees are moving on their own, swaying under the weight of ice or the influence of an air current that doesn't reach ground level. I know what a woodpecker sounds like against the fascia board, and what an acorn sounds like hitting the gutter, and what a deer sounds like brushing against the porch railing in the dark. These sounds are the soundtrack of living where I live. They're the price of proximity, the tax the forest levies for the privilege of existing in its space. What I heard on the night of February 11th was not any of those sounds. It was a Tuesday. February in McDowell County is the deepest part of winter. The days are short and colorless, the nights are long and cold, and the forest goes quiet in the way that only deciduous forest can when the leaves are gone and the birds have left and the undergrowth has died back to bare stems and frozen mud. The silence of a winter forest is different from any other kind of silence. It has a pressure to it, a weight that sits on the landscape like a lid on a jar, sealing in the cold and the dark and the stillness. Sounds carry further in winter because there's less to absorb them. A coyote calling on a distant ridge sounds like it's in the yard, and a branch breaking a quarter-mile away sounds like it's outside the window. The night was still. That's the important part. There was no wind. The weather had been calm all day, overcast, cold, temperatures in the mid-teens, and by nightfall the air had gone perfectly, completely still. Not the relative stillness of a light breeze dying down. Absolute stillness. The trees were motionless. The branches that usually scratched and tapped against the house in even mild wind were silent. The world outside my windows was frozen in place, locked in the particular paralysis of a windless winter night when the cold has gotten so deep that even the air stops moving. I was on the couch around midnight. Not unusual for me, I'm a night person by nature, and winter nights in the woods encourage lateness. The house was warm, the wood stove was burning, and I was reading a paperback with the television off, and the only light coming from a floor lamp next to the couch and the orange glow of the stove through its glass door. The living room window was to my left, covered by a heavy curtain that I kept drawn in winter to hold the heat. The curtain was the kind that blocks light thick, lined, the fabric heavy enough that it hung without movement even when the window behind it was open in summer. In February, with the window sealed and the air still, the curtain was as motionless as the wall it hung against. The tapping started at midnight. I know because I'd glanced at the clock on the wood stove, an old analog clock with a second hand that I'd put there more for decoration than function, and it showed 12 o'clock. Straight up, midnight. 3 taps on the glass. Sharp, clear, distinct. The sound of something hard, a fingertip, a knuckle, something with a defined point of contact striking the glass of my living room window 3 times in quick succession. Tap, tap, tap. A pause of about 2 seconds. Then 3 more. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up from my book. The curtain was undisturbed, hanging flat, no movement, no indication that anything had physically contacted the glass on the other side. But the sound was unmistakable. It came from the window, not from the wall, not from the roof, not from outside, in some general sense that the mind could file under ambient forest noise. It came from the glass, from the pane, from the specific point where something had struck the surface hard enough to produce a clear, audible tap that carried through the double-pane glass, through the curtain, and into the room where I was sitting. I set my book down. I listened. The pause stretched out 2 seconds, 3, 5. The house was quiet. The forest was quiet. The stove ticked. The clock swept. Nothing. Then 3 more taps. Same rhythm, same force, same location on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at the curtain the way you look at a door that's just been knocked on, not at the fabric itself, but through it, trying to see with your mind what your eyes can't reach. The window behind that curtain was a standard double-hung unit, 36 inches wide by 48 inches tall. The glass was clear. If the curtain were open, I'd be looking out into the front yard, across the porch, into the darkness of the tree line 20 feet away. But the curtain was closed, and the fabric was opaque, and whatever was tapping on the glass existed on the other side of a barrier that I would have to deliberately remove in order to see it. The tapping continued, 3 and 3 and 3, over and over, the rhythm steady and patient, the force consistent. Each set of taps was identical to the last, same spacing, same velocity, same point of contact on the glass. It was not random. It was not organic. A branch moved by wind would produce irregular taps, varying in force and timing with the gust that drove it. An animal, a bird, a bat, an insect would produce erratic contact patterns, the unpredictable percussion of a living thing interacting with a surface it doesn't understand. This was neither. This was rhythm. This was pattern. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, deliberate, intentional. The tapping of something that understood what it was doing and was doing it for a reason. I could feel each tap, not just hear it, feel it. The vibration traveled through the glass and into the window frame, and through the wall and into the room. A faint tremor that I could detect in the couch cushion beneath me, in the floor beneath my feet, in the air itself. The window was vibrating. The house was vibrating. Something was touching my house from the outside with enough force and enough regularity to make the structure around me hum at a frequency that existed at the very edge of perception. I didn't get up. I didn't go to the window. I didn't pull back the curtain. I know how that sounds. I know the reasonable response to someone knocking on your window at midnight in a house in the woods is to see who's there, to stand up, cross the room, pull the curtain aside, and look through the glass at whatever face or shape or explanation is waiting on the other side. That's what a rational person does. That's what I should have done. But I didn't. And the reason I didn't is difficult to explain because it wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a knowledge. A certainty that arrived in my body without passing through my brain, that settled into my muscles and my joints and my nervous system with the absolute authority of instinct, the same authority that makes you pull your hand away from a flame before you consciously register the heat. I knew that looking was wrong. Not dangerous in the way that a loaded gun is dangerous or a cliff edge is dangerous, not a threat to my body. Wrong in a different way. Wrong in the way that certain actions are wrong not because of what they do to you, but because of what they permit. Looking would be an acceptance, an acknowledgement, a response to a stimulus that was designed to provoke a response. The tapping wanted me at the window. It wanted my face at the glass, my eyes on the other side, the curtain pulled back, the barrier removed. It was patient because it could afford to be patient. It would tap all night if it had to. 3 and 3 and 3, over and over, until I did what any person would do, got up, walked over, looked, and whatever was out there, whatever was pressing its fingers or its knuckles or its whatever against my window, in the dead of a windless February night, it wanted to see me as much as I was supposed to want to see it. The tapping was not aggression. It was invitation. I stayed on the couch. I picked up my book. I didn't read it. The words were shapes on a page, meaningless, but I held it in front of my face, and I directed my attention at it, and I refused to look at the curtain. The tapping continued, steady, patient, unhurried. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. The rhythm became a kind of metronome, a pulse that synchronized with the ticking of the clock on the stove and the beating of my heart and the slow, measured breathing that I was performing with the deliberate effort of someone who needed the sound of their own respiration to fill the space between the taps. 20 minutes. I sat on that couch for 20 minutes while something tapped on my window in a pattern that didn't vary by a single beat. I didn't move. I didn't look. I felt each tap in my chest, in my teeth, in the thin bones of my feet pressed against the cold floor. The sound was everywhere in the room because the glass was vibrating and the frame was vibrating and the wall was vibrating and the house itself was resonating with the simple, repeated contact of something touching it from outside, asking to be seen. At 12:23 a.m., I checked the clock when the silence came, needed to know what time the tapping stopped, the way you need to know what time a storm passes. It stopped. Mid-pattern, 2 taps into a set of 3. Tap, tap, and then nothing. The 3rd tap didn't come. The pause didn't come. The rhythm broke, and the silence that replaced it was so sudden and so total that it felt like a physical sensation, like stepping off a ledge, like the air in the room changing pressure all at once. I sat in that silence for another 20 minutes. I listened for the tapping to resume, for the pattern to pick up where it had left off, for the 3rd tap that should have completed the sequence. It didn't come. The window was still. The house was still. The forest was still. Whatever had been there was gone, and the night had closed over the space it had occupied with the smooth, seamless completeness of water closing over a stone. I went to bed. I didn't look at the window. I walked down the hallway with my back to the living room, and I got into bed, and I lay in the dark, and I listened to the house and the forest and the night, and nothing tapped, and nothing moved. And I slept eventually because the body insists on sleep, even when the mind insists on vigilance. Morning came. Gray February light, thin and cold, filtering through the bedroom curtain and landing on the floor in a pale rectangle that said the world was still here and still functioning by its usual rules. I got up. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen counter and looked out the kitchen window at the front yard, the porch, the driveway, the tree line, and everything was normal. Everything was white with frost and gray with winter and still in the windless cold. I went to the living room window. I pulled back the curtain. The glass was clear, clean, unsmudged, undamaged. No cracks, no marks, no indication that anything had touched it during the night. The double pane was intact. The surface was as smooth and featureless as it had been when I'd cleaned it last fall. I looked at the sill. The outside sill, the narrow ledge of wood at the base of the window, exposed to the elements, frosted over in a thin white layer of ice crystals that had formed overnight in the still, cold air. The sill had marks on it. 5 impressions, pressed into the frost, arranged in a line, spaced about an inch apart, at the point on the sill directly below the center of the glass, where the tapping had been loudest. Each impression was oval, about the size of a fingertip, and they were oriented the way fingertips would be oriented if a hand were pressed flat against the sill with the fingers pointing upward toward the glass. 4 parallel impressions, and 1 slightly offset to the side, 4 fingers and a thumb, a hand, pressed into the frost on my windowsill, hard enough and long enough to melt through the ice layer and leave a clear impression of each digit on the wood beneath. I walked outside. I went to the front yard and I looked at the ground beneath the window. The frost covered everything: the yard, the porch boards, the gravel of the driveway, the bare earth at the edge of the tree line. A thin, even layer of white ice crystals on every surface, undisturbed, unbroken, as perfect and uninterrupted as a sheet of paper. No footprints, not in the frost on the porch, not on the ground beneath the window, not on the path from the tree line to the house, not anywhere. The yard was pristine. The frost was intact. Nobody had walked across that ground. Nobody had climbed onto that porch. Nobody had stood beneath that window and reached up and pressed their hand against the sill and tapped on the glass for 20 minutes at midnight. But the handprint was there, 5 fingertips in the frost, a hand that had come from nowhere and touched the edge of my house and left its mark and then vanished without leaving a trace of arrival or departure. I've never heard the tapping again. It's been almost 2 years, and the window has been quiet every night, and the frost on the sill, on the mornings when frost forms, on the still, windless nights when the temperatures drop below 20 and the ice crystals coat every surface, the frost has been undisturbed. But I still don't open the curtain after dark. I still don't sit on the couch facing the window at midnight. I still don't look. Because the tapping was an invitation. I understood that then, and I understand it now. It wanted me at the glass. It wanted the curtain pulled back and my face visible, and the barrier between inside and outside reduced to a pane of glass, and whatever distance exists between two faces looking at each other through it. And I think about the handprint. 5 fingers in the frost. A hand pressed flat against the sill, reaching up, reaching for the glass, reaching for the space where my face would have been if I'd looked. It came from nowhere. It left no tracks. It touched my house, and it tapped on my window, and it waited for 20 minutes with a patience that suggests it had done this before and would do it again. And the only variable was whether the person inside would respond. I didn't respond. I sat on my couch, and I held my book, and I refused the invitation. But some nights, when the wind dies and the forest goes still, and the silence presses down on the house like a hand on a lid, I hear something. Not tapping, not yet. Something quieter. Something that exists below the threshold of sound, in the register where vibration becomes feeling rather than noise. A presence. At the window, on the other side of the curtain, on the other side of the glass, in the dark and the cold and the frost, standing on a porch that shows no footprints, reaching for a sill that shows no approach, waiting, not tapping, not yet, just there, patient, the way the forest is patient, the way the dark is patient, the way anything is patient when it has no schedule and no urgency and all the time in the world to wait for the one moment when you forget yourself and pull back the curtain and look. I keep the curtain closed. I keep my eyes on the book. I keep my back to the window and my face to the fire, and I wait for morning the way the thing outside waits for me. We're both patient. We're both still. We're both waiting for the other to do something first. So far, neither of us has blinked. The plant runs 2 shifts, days and nights, and I've been on nights for the better part of 3 years. 12 hours, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 days on and 3 days off, operating a stamping press in Building C of the Appalachian Steel Components facility outside of Logan, West Virginia. The schedule is brutal in ways that people who work regular hours don't understand. It isn't just the tiredness, it's the inversion. Your body exists on a different clock than the rest of the world, and after a while, the rest of the world starts to feel like something happening on the other side of a window, visible but separate, running on a timeline that doesn't include you. You sleep when the sun is up, you eat dinner at midnight, you drive home at 6 a.m. on roads that are just starting to fill with people going the other direction, and the headlights coming toward you feel like signals from a civilization you used to belong to. I mention the schedule because it matters, because whoever was in my house knew it. The house is on Mud Fork Road, about 9 miles east of Logan, a hollow that narrows as it climbs, until the road becomes a single lane of cracked asphalt with no shoulder and no center line, and trees so close on both sides that in summer the canopy closes overhead and you drive through a tunnel of green that blocks the sky. There are maybe a dozen houses scattered along the 4-mile stretch of Mud Fork, most of them set back from the road, most of them old, some of them empty. My nearest neighbor is the Markham place, about a 1/4 mile down the road, occupied by Dale Markham and his wife Brenda, both in their 70s, both in bed by 8 o'clock every night. Beyond the Markhams, the next occupied house is nearly a mile further, and beyond that, the road dead ends at a logging gate and the forest takes over completely. I bought my place in 2019, a 2-bedroom frame house, built in the 1970s, white siding gone gray, sitting on a quarter-acre lot that backs up to the mountain. The yard is small, maybe 40 feet of grass between the back of the house and the tree line is steep, rising up the hillside at an angle that would make walking difficult and running impossible. The front faces the road, with a gravel driveway that holds 2 vehicles, if you park carefully, and a covered porch that I almost never use, because I'm either sleeping or at work, and the in-between hours are spent on the mechanics of existing, eating, showering, staring at the television until my eyes adjust to being open. I live alone. I've lived alone since I moved in. The house is set up for one person, one plate in the dish rack, one towel on the bathroom hook, one side of the bed slept in and the other side undisturbed for so long that the pillow has gone flat from neglect. Living alone in a hollow in Logan County is not unusual. Half the houses on Mud Fork are occupied by single people, widowers, divorced men, people who ended up by themselves through the ordinary machinery of time and circumstance, and the specific kind of attrition that rural West Virginia applies to relationships. Nobody notices you here. Nobody checks on you. The mail comes, the power stays on, and the hollow goes about its business without requiring anything from you, except that you continue to exist in the space you've claimed. This is relevant because someone noticed me, someone checked on me, someone learned the rhythm of my existence when I left, when I returned, how many hours the house was empty and used that knowledge. It was a Thursday in November. I was on night shift 4 days into a 4-day stretch, which meant I was operating on the kind of accumulated fatigue that turns the edges of the world soft and makes every action feel like it's happening a half second after you initiate it. My shift ended at 6 a.m., but I'd agreed to stay for 4 hours of overtime because the day shift was shorthanded and the press doesn't care who's running it as long as someone is. I clocked out at 10 a.m., drove the 9 miles home, and pulled into my driveway at approximately 10:25. The house was dark. This was normal. I don't leave lights on when I leave. Force of habit, frugality, the general principle that an empty house doesn't need to be illuminated. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. The house looked exactly the way it always looked when I came home closed, still waiting for me to walk in and turn it back on. I parked in the driveway, got out, walked to the front door. Key in the deadbolt, turn, click, push. The door opened. I stepped inside and stopped. Something was wrong. Not wrong in a way I could identify with a specific sense. Not a sound, not a sight, not a smell, although there was something in the air, something faint, something that existed below the threshold of identification. It was more fundamental than any individual sensation. It was the feeling of displacement, the feeling of a space that has been occupied by someone other than you and has not yet fully recovered from their presence. Like walking into a conference room where a meeting ended 5 minutes ago, the chairs are empty, the voices are gone, but the air still holds the shape of the people who were in it, the warmth of their bodies, the disturbance of their movement, the invisible residue of human presence that lingers in a room after the human has left. My house felt occupied. Not currently, not in the way that would make me think someone was hiding in the back bedroom or standing behind a door. It felt recently occupied, as if the emptiness was fresh, as if the house had gone from full to empty in the minutes before I arrived, and the transition was still settling, still completing itself, the way water takes a moment to go still after the thing that disturbed it has been removed. I stood in the doorway. The front hall was dark. The coat closet to my right was open, not wide open, cracked, maybe 2 inches. Enough to see the edge of the door and the darkness behind it. Enough to notice because I keep that door closed. Always. Not for any particular reason it's a coat closet. There's nothing in it that requires concealment, but because I'm the kind of person who closes doors. Cabinet doors, closet doors, the dishwasher door, the bathroom door, even when nobody else is in the house. It's a compulsion or a preference or a habit, depending on how generous you want to be with the terminology. The closet door is always closed because I always close it. It was open. I stepped further inside. I reached for the kitchen light switch on the wall to my left and flipped it. The fluorescent tube above the sink buzzed and flickered and caught, filling the kitchen with the flat, bluish-white light that I'd been coming home to for 5 years. But before I flipped it, in the instant my fingers touched the switch plate, I noticed something. The plate was warm. Not the ambient warmth of a surface in a heated house. My thermostat is set to 58 when I'm at work, just enough to keep the pipes from freezing. Warmer than that, the warmth of a light that has been on recently. The warmth that a switch plate absorbs from the fixture it controls, when that fixture has been running for an extended period and has only recently been turned off. Someone had been using my kitchen light and had turned it off before I got home. I looked at the kitchen. Everything was where it should be: the dish rack with its single plate, the coffee maker on the counter, the paper towel roll on its holder, the salt and pepper shakers on the table, everything except the chair. I have a small kitchen table, round, with 4 chairs arranged around it at equal intervals. I sit in the same chair every time, the one facing the window that looks out onto the backyard. That chair was where I left it, pushed in, parallel to the table's edge. But the chair opposite mine, the one with its back to the window, the one nobody ever sits in, was pulled out, not dramatically, maybe 6 inches from the table, angled slightly to the right, in the position a chair assumes when someone has been sitting in it and stood up and pushed it back, but not all the way. The angle was wrong for anything accidental: a vibration, a settling of the floor, the house shifting on its foundation. The angle was the angle of use. I stood in my kitchen and looked at that chair. The fluorescent light hummed. The house was quiet. The displacement I'd felt at the front door was here too. The air in the kitchen held the recent memory of a body, the faint thermal signature of someone who had been sitting at my table under my light in a chair that nobody ever used, and who was not there now. I searched the house. I did it methodically, moving from room to room with my hand on the hunting knife. I keep on the shelf by the front door. Living room empty, bathroom empty, shower curtain pulled back the way I leave it, nothing behind it. Master bedroom empty, closet empty, nothing under the bed. I checked every space a person could hide. I checked spaces a person couldn't hide: the gap behind the water heater, the shelf above the laundry machines, the crawl space access panel in the hallway floor, which was still screwed down tight. Nobody. The house was empty. Whatever presence I'd felt was gone, and the evidence of it was limited to a cracked closet door, a warm switch plate, and a chair pulled 6 inches from a table. Then I checked the spare bedroom. The spare bedroom is the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, at the back of the house, facing the hillside. I use it for storage boxes of old clothes, a broken treadmill, some tools, the general accumulation of objects that don't have anywhere else to go. The window in the spare bedroom is a single-hung unit, the kind that slides up from the bottom, with a crescent lock on the top rail that you twist to engage. I keep it locked. Every window in the house stays locked. Every door stays deadbolted, not because of any specific threat, but because I live alone in a hollow in Logan County, and the world is what it is, and locks exist for a reason. The window was unlocked. The crescent lock was in the open position, rotated 90 degrees from where I keep it, and the window itself was up, not fully, maybe 4 inches, letting in a thin blade of November air that I could feel on my face from across the room, cold and sharp, and carrying the smell of the mountain and the dead leaves on the hillside, and the specific dampness of the ground outside. I crossed the room. I looked at the windowsill. The boot print was on the inside sill, a clear, complete impression of a right foot, a boot, medium-sized, with a lug sole pattern that pressed into the thin layer of dust and grime that accumulates on a windowsill in a room that doesn't get much use. The mud was dark, the kind of mud that forms on steep hillsides where the leaf litter mixes with clay soil and the drainage keeps the ground perpetually soft. The print was oriented with the toe pointing into the room, the mark of someone who had planted their foot on the sill after climbing through the window from outside, using the ledge as a step before dropping to the floor. I looked at the floor beneath the window, faint scuffs in the dust. Not clear prints. Whoever had come through had been careful, or had cleaned up, or had moved with the kind of deliberate lightness that distributes weight and minimizes marks. But the scuffs were there, a trail of disturbance in the dust that led from the window to the bedroom door, to the hallway, to the kitchen where the light had been on and the chair had been pulled out, and someone had been sitting in the seat that faces away from the window so they could watch the front of the house, watch the driveway, watch for headlights coming up Mud Fork Road. I stood in the spare bedroom with the cold air coming through the cracked window, and I reassembled the sequence. Someone had come up the hillside behind my house, through the trees, down the slope to the back wall. They had reached the spare bedroom window, defeated the crescent lock, which is easy. A butter knife or a thin piece of metal slipped between the sashes, will rotate it and slid the window up. They had climbed through, boot on the sill, into the house. They had walked to the kitchen. They had turned on the light. They had pulled out a chair and sat down at my table. And they had stayed. How long? I couldn't say. Hours, possibly. I'd been gone since 5:30 p.m. the previous day, nearly 17 hours, counting the overtime. 17 hours during which my house was empty and dark, and someone was inside it, sitting at my kitchen table with the light on and the chair pulled out, existing in my space the way I exist in it, using my light, breathing my air, looking out my windows. And then they left. Before I got home. Before my headlights appeared at the bottom of Mud Fork Road and made their way up the hollow. Before the sound of my truck on the gravel driveway announced that the owner was returning and the house needed to be empty again. They turned off the light. They pushed the chair back, but not far enough. They closed the coat closet, but not all the way. They went back to the spare bedroom, climbed out the window, and left it cracked, whether by carelessness or by the haste of departure, I couldn't tell. They went up the hillside, into the trees, into the dark, and I almost missed it. If the closet door had been fully closed, if the chair had been pushed all the way in, if the window had been pulled shut behind them, I would have walked into my house and turned on the light and sat down at my table and never known. The displacement in the air would have faded. The warmth on the switch plate would have cooled. The feeling of recent occupation would have dissolved into the ambient silence of a house that was mine again, and I would have gone to bed believing that nothing had happened, that nobody had been there, that the hours my house spent empty were truly empty. I called the sheriff's department. A deputy came out, took maybe 45 minutes, which is fast for Mud Fork, and looked at the boot print and the window and the chair, and wrote things in a notebook and told me what I already knew, which was that someone had entered my home without authorization, and that there was no way to determine who without more evidence. He dusted the windowsill and the kitchen table for fingerprints. He found partials on the table surface, smudged, unusable, the kind of prints that could be mine or could be anyone's. He took photographs. He gave me a case number. He told me to get better locks on the windows, maybe a security camera, and to call back if anything else happened. I got the locks. I got the cameras, 3 of them, covering the front, the back, and the hillside. I got a motion-activated floodlight for the back of the house that turns the yard into a white blaze when anything bigger than a raccoon moves through it. I changed my routine. I stopped working overtime. I started varying my departure and arrival times by 15 or 20 minutes in each direction, introducing enough randomness into my schedule to make it harder to predict when the house would be empty and when it wouldn't. Nothing happened for 3 weeks. The cameras captured deer, raccoons, a black bear that wandered through the yard one morning at 4 a.m. and set off the floodlight and stood there blinking in the glare like a man caught in a lie. No people, no movement on the hillside, no evidence that anyone had been near the house since the night I came home to a warm light switch and a chair pulled out from my kitchen table. Then one morning I came home from a shift and found the back camera repositioned, not knocked down, not damaged, not moved by wind or weather, adjusted. The mounting bracket had been loosened, the camera body rotated approximately 30 degrees to the left, and the bracket retightened. The camera, which had been aimed at the spare bedroom window, was now pointing at the tree line, away from the house, away from the window, deliberately redirected by someone who knew it was there, who understood what it was watching, and who wanted it watching something else. The footage showed nothing. The camera had been recording the tree line for what the timestamp indicated was about 6 hours. 6 hours of bare branches and dark hillside and the slow, patient nothing of a West Virginia night. 6 hours during which the camera's back was turned, and the window it had been guarding was unobserved. I checked the spare bedroom window, locked. I checked the coat closet, closed. I checked the kitchen chair, pushed in. Everything was in order. Everything was where it should be. No boot prints, no warm switches, no displacement in the air. But the camera had been moved. Someone had stood at the back of my house, in the dark, close enough to touch the wall, and had turned my camera away from the thing it was designed to watch. And they had done it calmly, carefully, with a screwdriver or a wrench or their bare hands, loosening the bracket, rotating the housing, retightening the bolt, taking their time, working methodically, not rushed, not panicked, not behaving like someone who was afraid of being caught, behaving like someone who had done this before, who had been here before, who knew the house and the schedule and the camera placement and had come back not despite the new security measures but in acknowledgement of them, adjusting, adapting, incorporating the cameras and the locks and the floodlight into the same careful choreography that had allowed them to sit at my kitchen table for 17 hours without being detected. I don't know who it is. The sheriff's department doesn't know. Dale Markham hasn't seen anyone on the road. The cameras haven't captured a face. The boot print was a common lug pattern, available at any Walmart or farm supply store, and the partial fingerprints matched nothing in any database the deputy had access to. I know what they know about me, though. They know my schedule. They know which window is easiest to open. They know where I sit and which lights I use and what time I leave and what time I come back. They know I installed cameras, and they know where I pointed them, and they know how to move them without triggering the motion sensor that should have captured them doing it. They know my house the way I know my house, from the inside. I still live on Mud Fork Road. I still work nights at the plant. I still come home to a dark house at the end of a long driveway, at the end of a hollow where nobody checks on you and nobody notices, and the distance between houses is measured in the silence that fills the space between them. But sometimes when I pull into the driveway and the headlights sweep across the front of the house, I see something that I can't quite process. Not a movement, not a shape, something subtler. A quality in the darkness of the windows that suggests the darkness is recent, that it was something else a moment ago, something warmer, something inhabited, and that it became darkness in the seconds between my headlights touching the glass and my eyes registering what was behind it. The house is always empty when I walk in. The doors are always locked. The cameras are always pointed where I left them. Everything is always in order. But the air takes a moment to settle, and the silence feels new, and the house has the particular stillness of a space that is performing emptiness rather than experiencing it. And I sit at the kitchen table in the chair that faces the window, and I look at the chair across from me, the one that nobody sits in, the one that's always pushed in, the one that's always exactly where I left it, and I wonder if it's warm. I never check. Some things, I've decided, are better not confirmed. The farmhouse has been in my family since 1946, when my grandfather bought it with cash from 4 years of Army pay he'd saved by not drinking, not gambling, and not doing any of the other things that soldiers did with money they earned in places they didn't want to be. He paid $1,800 for the house and the 40 acres it sits on bottomland along the East Fork of Indian Creek, about 6 miles outside of Princeton, in Mercer County, West Virginia. The land is good, the house is old. These two facts have been in tension with each other for nearly 80 years, and the house has been losing slowly but steadily, the way old things lose to the land they sit on. A crack in the foundation here, a sag in the roofline there, the slow accumulation of small defeats that eventually add up to the particular character of a building that has been standing longer than anyone expected and is held together as much by habit as by structure. I moved in after my grandmother died in 2017. She'd been the last one living there. My grandfather died in 1989. My parents moved to Bluefield in the 90s, and the house had been my grandmother's alone for nearly 30 years. When she passed, the family had to decide what to do with the property, and the decision fell to me mostly because nobody else wanted it. My brother lives in Charlotte. My sister lives in Columbus. Neither of them was interested in a farmhouse on 40 acres of bottomland in Mercer County, with no cell signal and a septic system that my grandfather installed himself using techniques that would horrify a modern inspector. I took it because I'd just gone through a divorce and needed somewhere cheap to exist while I recalibrated my life. And because the house, for all its problems, felt like the kind of place where a person could be quiet for a while without anyone bothering them about it. The house has a landline. This is the detail that matters, and I want to be precise about it because the specifics are important. The phone is a wall-mounted unit in the kitchen, a Western Electric model, cream-colored, installed sometime in the 1970s when my grandfather finally agreed to replace the rotary phone that had been there since the 50s. It has a handset connected to the base by a coiled cord that stretches about 4 feet when you pull it taut, a rotary-style dial that was retrofitted with a touch-tone pad at some point, and an internal bell, a real bell, not a speaker playing a recording of a bell. 2 small metal hemispheres struck by a clapper driven by an electromagnetic coil, powered by the phone line's own current. When that phone rings, you feel it in your molars. The sound is sharp, metallic, and absolute, the sound of a mechanical system doing the one thing it was designed to do with the full commitment of every component working in concert. I keep the landline for practical reasons. The cell signal at the house is non-existent. Mercer County's topography creates dead zones the way a colander creates drainage, and my particular hollow is one of the deepest. The landline works when the power goes out, which it does regularly. Ice storms, wind, falling trees on the lines, the general fragility of rural electrical infrastructure. The phone doesn't need electricity. It draws power from the telephone line itself, which runs on a separate system maintained by the phone company with a different set of poles and a different set of vulnerabilities. When the lights go out and the heat goes off and the house goes dark, the phone on the kitchen wall still works. You pick it up and you hear the dial tone, steady and reassuring, the sound of connection persisting when everything else has failed. I mention all of this because I need you to understand what the phone is. Not a cell phone, not a cordless handset running on batteries and radio frequencies. A physical, hardwired telephone connected to the wall by a cord, connected to the phone network by a wire that runs from the junction box on the outside of the house to the telephone pole at the end of the driveway to the switching station in Princeton. A closed system, a direct, physical connection between my kitchen and the network, mediated by copper wire and nothing else. On March 7th, a Thursday, I went to bed around 11:30 p.m. The house was quiet. March in Mercer County is the end of winter, but not the beginning of spring. The cold lingers, the nights are long, the wind comes down the hollow with a sharpness that suggests the season isn't finished with you yet, even if the calendar says otherwise. I'd been reading in bed, the way I usually do before sleep, and I turned the light off and settled into the particular silence of the farmhouse at night, which is not true silence, but a layered composition of small sounds, the house creaking as the temperature drops, the furnace clicking on and off, the wind testing the windows, the distant and occasional sound of a vehicle on the county road a half-mile away. Normal sounds, the sounds of a house and a hollow and a night doing what they do. I fell asleep around midnight. I don't know the exact time because I'd stopped looking at the clock, which is my usual signal that sleep is close. The moment I stop tracking the time is the moment my mind has agreed to let go of the day and allow unconsciousness to take over. The phone woke me at 1 a.m. The ring cut through the house like a blade through fabric, sharp, sudden, total. The mechanical bell doesn't fade in, it doesn't build. It goes from silence to full volume in the space between one moment and the next. A binary transition from nothing to everything, and the sound fills the house because the house is old, and the walls are thin, and the kitchen is 12 feet from the bedroom, and the bell was designed to be heard by people who lived in houses where the rooms were small, and the doors were open, and the whole point of a telephone was to announce itself with enough authority to interrupt whatever you were doing. I was awake instantly, not the groggy, disoriented waking of a normal night, the full, adrenaline-sharp waking of a body that has been jolted out of sleep by a sound that is too loud and too sudden to process gently. My heart was elevated before my eyes were open. My legs were swinging off the bed before my mind had identified the sound. The phone was ringing, and the ring was filling the house, and I was moving toward it, because that's what you do when the phone rings at 1 a.m. in a farmhouse, where a phone call at that hour means something is wrong. Someone is hurt. Someone is dead. Someone is calling because they have to, not because they want to, and the urgency of the hour demands that you answer. I walked to the kitchen. The phone was on the wall, ringing, the bell vibrating the handset in its cradle with each strike. I picked it up. Silence. Not dead air. I want to be clear about the distinction because it matters. Dead air is the absence of signal, the flat, empty nothing of a line that isn't connected, the sound of a phone call that never completed. This was not that. This was connected silence. The open, ambient quiet of a live line, a call that had been placed and answered and was now active, with two endpoints connected by a circuit that was carrying signal in both directions. I could hear the line, the faint hiss of current moving through copper wire, the barely perceptible hum of the telephone network doing its work, the subtle audio texture that distinguishes a live call from a dead one. Someone had dialed my number. The call had connected. The line was open, but nobody was speaking. I said hello. The word went into the handset and traveled down the wire and reached the other end, wherever the other end was, and nothing came back. The silence absorbed my voice the way water absorbs a stone completely, without reaction, without acknowledgement. I said hello again. Same result. The silence didn't change, didn't deepen, didn't respond, didn't shift in any way that suggested a human presence on the other end, processing my greeting and choosing not to reply. It was silence doing what silence does, which is nothing, but doing it through a telephone connection that required active participation from both ends to remain open. I hung up. The handset clicked into the cradle. The line disconnected. The kitchen was quiet. The phone rang immediately. Before my hand had fully released the handset, before the click of the cradle had finished resonating in the plastic housing, immediately. The bell struck as if it had been waiting for the handset to return to its resting position before resuming, as if the act of hanging up was not a termination but a reset, a clearing of the circuit that allowed the next call to arrive without delay. I picked up, connected silence. The same hiss, the same hum, the same open line carrying nothing. I listened for 10 seconds, 15, waiting for a voice, a breath, a cough, any human sound that would transform the silence into something with a source. Nothing came. I looked at the caller ID display. It was a small LCD screen built into the base unit, an aftermarket edition my grandmother had installed sometime in the 2000s. The screen showed a number, my number, the landline number of the phone I was holding, displayed on the caller ID of the phone I was holding, indicating that the call I was receiving had originated from the phone I was using to receive it. My house was calling itself. I stared at the display. The number was correct, the 10-digit number assigned to this landline, the number printed on the phone bill that comes every month, the number I give to doctors' offices and insurance forms, and the few remaining institutions that still ask for a home phone. It was my number, calling my number, on a phone that was physically incapable of calling itself because it was a single-line telephone connected to a single jack, connected to a single pair of wires running to a single address. The phone cannot call itself. The system doesn't work that way. A telephone is one endpoint of a connection. It can initiate a call to another endpoint or receive a call from another endpoint, but it cannot be both simultaneously. The physics of the thing don't allow it. The switching station won't route a call from a number back to the same number. It's like trying to mail a letter to yourself using only one mailbox. The infrastructure prevents it, but my number was on the screen, and the line was open, and the silence on the other end was patient and steady, and showed no signs of ending. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen. The fluorescent light was on. I'd flipped it by habit when I walked in, and the room was bright and ordinary, and every object was where it belonged, and the only thing wrong was the phone, which was sitting in its cradle on the wall, displaying my own number on its caller ID screen. I reached behind the phone and found the cord that connected it to the wall jack. The cord was a standard RJ11 telephone cable, plugged into the modular jack mounted in the wall plate at about waist height. I pulled the plug out of the jack. The connection broke with a small click, the plastic tab releasing, the plug sliding free. The physical circuit between my phone and the telephone network severed. The phone was now disconnected, not on hook, not idle, not waiting for a call. Disconnected, isolated, a piece of plastic and metal and wire attached to my kitchen wall and connected to nothing. The phone rang. The bell struck. The mechanical clapper hit the metal hemispheres inside the housing and produced the same sharp, loud, absolute ring that had woken me from sleep 5 minutes earlier. The handset vibrated in the cradle. The sound filled the kitchen, bounced off the counters, reverberated in the window glass. I was holding the unplugged cord in my left hand. The end of it was in my palm, the RJ11 plug resting against my fingers, disconnected from the wall jack by 8 inches of air. The phone was ringing. The phone that was not connected to anything was ringing, the bell operating without the line current that powered it, the electromagnetic coil activating without the signal that drove it, the entire mechanical system performing its function in the absence of the input that made its function possible. I picked up the handset. I don't know why. The rational response to a disconnected phone ringing is to not engage with it, to put it down, walk away, call someone, do something that creates distance between you and the thing that isn't behaving the way things are supposed to behave. But I picked it up. I held it to my ear. I listened. Connected silence. The same silence, the same hiss, the same hum, the same open-line texture of a call in progress, as if the disconnection hadn't happened, as if the cord in my left hand, the cord that was physically separated from the wall jack by a gap of air that I could see and feel, was still carrying signal, as if the connection existed independently of the wire that was supposed to create it. I looked at the caller ID, my number. I set the handset on the counter. I didn't hang it up. I placed it face down on the formica, the earpiece and mouthpiece resting against the surface, the coiled cord stretching from the base unit on the wall to the counter below. The handset lay there, disconnected from the network, separated from the base, and the kitchen went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then it rang again. The handset on the counter rang. The mechanical bell inside it vibrated against the formica, producing a buzzing, metallic sound that was different from the normal ring, flatter, harder, the sound of a bell resonating against a solid surface instead of open air. I picked it up, connected silence. My number on the display. I set it down. It rang again. Picked it up. Silence. My number. Set it down. It rang again. 3 times in total, each ring arriving within seconds of the handset being placed on the counter, each call showing my number, each connection delivering the same patient, steady, sourceless silence. Then it stopped. The 3rd time I set the handset down, the kitchen stayed quiet. No ring, no vibration, no bell. The handset lay on the counter, and the base unit sat on the wall, and the unplugged cord hung between them, and everything was still. I stood there for a long time, 5 minutes, 10 waiting for the next ring, waiting for the bell to strike, waiting for my number to appear on the screen again. It didn't. Whatever had been calling had completed its business, had said what it came to say, which was nothing, which was silence, which was the sound of a connection without content, and had ended the interaction on its own terms. I plugged the phone back in the next morning. I don't know why I waited until morning to do it, except that the dark felt like the wrong time to restore the connection, as if the night and the phone and the silence were related, and reconnecting the wire, while the dark was still present, would be an invitation for the ringing to resume. Morning felt safer. The light felt like a boundary. The phone has worked normally ever since. It rings when people call. The caller ID shows their numbers. The voice on the other end is a voice my brother checking in, the pharmacy with a prescription notification, the occasional telemarketer who hasn't updated their list. Normal calls from normal numbers producing normal sounds. The phone is a phone. It does what phones do, but I don't answer it after midnight. I've thought about that night more than I've thought about almost anything else in my life. I've researched phone systems, line voltages, caller ID spoofing, electrical anomalies, everything I can find that might explain how a wall-mounted telephone can ring without being connected to a phone line, how a caller ID can display its own number, how a mechanical bell can activate without the current that drives it. I've found partial explanations: line glitches, voltage spikes, phantom ringing caused by electrical interference from nearby power lines or appliances. Each explanation accounts for one aspect of what happened. None of them account for all of it. None of them explain the connected silence. None of them explain the patience, the way the ringing followed me, tracked my responses, waited for me to hang up before calling again, stopped when it was done and not before. And none of them explain the thing I haven't mentioned yet. The thing I noticed after it was over, after the ringing stopped, after I stood in the kitchen holding the unplugged cord and waiting for a sound that didn't come. The silence on the line wasn't empty. I said that earlier. I said it was connected silence, the ambient quiet of a live call. But there was something in it that I didn't register at the time, because my mind was occupied with the impossibility of what was happening and didn't have room to process the subtler details. Something I only recognized later, lying in bed, replaying the calls in my memory with the focused attention that hindsight allows. Breathing, not loud, not close, not the breathing of someone holding a phone to their mouth. Distant breathing, deep in the background of the silence, beneath the hiss and the hum, as faint as the sound of wind through a room in a house you can't see. Slow, steady, rhythmic. The breathing of someone who was not trying to be heard and was not trying to hide. Someone who was there, on the other end of a call that had no other end, present in the silence the way a pulse is present in a wrist, constant, involuntary, and proof of something alive. My house called itself at 1 a.m. on a Thursday in March. The phone rang without being connected. The caller ID showed my number, and in the silence on the other end, something was breathing. I don't know who was calling. I don't know where the call came from. I don't know how a phone rings without a line, or how a number calls itself, or how breathing exists on a connection that shouldn't exist through a wire that was hanging loose in my hand. I know the phone works normally now. I know the daylight hours are safe, and the calls that come during them are from people with voices and names and numbers that belong to other houses. I know that after midnight, I let it ring. If it rings, if whoever called that night ever decides to call again, the phone is on the kitchen wall, the cord is plugged in, the line is live. And some nights, the still ones, the quiet ones, the ones where March comes back around and the cold hasn't broken and the house settles into the kind of silence that old houses settle into, when nobody is talking and nobody is moving, and the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator, and the tick of the furnace, and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of a telephone line carrying current through a wire that runs from my kitchen wall to a pole at the end of the driveway to a switching station in Princeton, to wherever the network goes when it disappears into the Salme, infrastructure that connects everything to everything else. Some nights I stand in the kitchen and I look at the phone and I listen, and I hear the hum, the line hum, the sound of current in copper, the sound of connection, the sound of a circuit that is always active and always waiting. And I think I hear, beneath it, so faint that it could be imagination, so distant that it could be nothing, breathing, slow and steady and patient, on the other end of a line that shouldn't have another end, waiting for me to pick up. I don't pick up, but the breathing doesn't stop, and the line stays open, and my number glows on the caller ID in the dark kitchen, displayed on a screen that nobody is looking at, showing a call that nobody made, from a house that is calling itself across a distance that doesn't exist, through a connection that I have no name for, and no explanation for, and no way to sever, because you can't hang up on something that's already inside the wire. You can only let it ring. The bungalow is on James River Road, about 3 miles west of Hinton, set back from the road on a half-acre lot that slopes gently toward the river. It's a 1940s build single-story, clapboard siding painted white, sometime in the last decade by someone who didn't bother to scrape the old paint first, so the surface has a textured, layered quality that suggests the house has been white for a long time, but has never been white in exactly the same way twice. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opens into a living room through an arched doorway that somebody cut into the original wall during a renovation that was ambitious in concept and approximate in execution. The floors are hardwood oak, original, worn smooth by 80 years of foot traffic that has polished certain paths into the grain the way water polishes stone. The front door faces the road. The back door faces the river, which you can hear at night when the windows are open, a constant low murmur that becomes the baseline of every silence in the house, the sound beneath all other sounds. The windows are the feature I bought the house for. That sounds like a strange thing to say about a house, that you chose it for its windows, but anyone who's seen the place understands. They're oversized for the era, tall and wide, double-hung units with the original wavy glass still in most of them, and there are a lot of them. The living room alone has 2 on the front wall facing the road, 1 on the side wall facing the neighbor's property, and 1 large picture window on the back wall facing the river and the hills beyond it. During the day, the house is luminous. Light pours in from every direction, fills the rooms, bounces off the hardwood floors, makes the whole place feel like a space that exists in partnership with the outside, rather than in opposition to it. It's the kind of house that dissolves the boundary between interior and exterior, that makes you feel like you're living in the landscape rather than next to it, during the day. At night, the windows change. This is true of all windows. Of course, the physics of reflection and transparency means that any window becomes a mirror when the light on one side is stronger than the light on the other. During the day, when the sun is brighter than your interior lights, you see through the glass to the world outside. At night, when your lamps and your television are brighter than the darkness beyond the pane, the glass reverses. It shows you the room you're in. It shows you yourself, sitting in a space that appears to extend beyond its walls into a reflected duplicate that is identical in every detail, except that it exists on the other side of the glass, in the dark, in a place you can't reach and can't verify and can't confirm, is showing you what's actually there. I've lived alone in the bungalow since I bought it in 2021. I moved from Beckley after a job change. I work remotely now, Data processing for a healthcare company, the kind of work that requires a computer and an internet connection and nothing else, which means I can do it from a bungalow on James River Road as easily as I could from an apartment in a city, and the bungalow is cheaper and quieter and has windows that let in light that no apartment has ever matched. I like living alone. I like the silence. I like the simplicity of a house that contains one person and that person's things and nothing else. No competing schedules, no negotiations about temperature or volume or when to go to bed. The house is mine. The silence is mine. The windows and the light and the view of the river and the hills are mine. The night it happened was a Saturday in January. Cold, clear, no wind. The kind of winter night that turns the sky into a black dome scattered with stars that are visible only because there's nothing between you and them. No clouds, no humidity, no light pollution from a town that's 3 miles away and small enough to make only a faint amber glow on the eastern horizon. I'd spent the day working, which is unremarkable, and by evening I was ready to not work, which is also unremarkable. I made dinner, cleaned up, and settled onto the couch in the living room to watch a movie. The living room arrangement is simple. The couch is positioned against the side wall, facing the arched doorway to the kitchen and the television, which sits on a stand against the wall adjacent to the front windows. When I'm on the couch, the TV is in front of me, and to my left, the kitchen archway is ahead, and to my right, the front windows are to my far left, and the big picture window, the one that faces the river, is directly behind me, behind the couch. Behind my head, I had all the lights off. This was normal for movie watching. I prefer the immersion of a dark room, the way the television becomes the only light source, and the room organizes itself around the screen. The TV cast a shifting, colored glow across the walls and ceiling blues and whites, and the occasional warm tone when the scene changed, a moving palette that animated the room's surfaces with reflected light. The rest of the house was dark. The kitchen was dark. The hallway that led to the bedrooms was dark. The world outside the windows was dark, the January night pressing against the glass with the uniform blackness of a rural landscape at 10 p.m. I was about 40 minutes into the film. Not focused intently, the movie was something I'd seen before. A background experience more than an active one. The kind of watching where your eyes are on the screen but your mind is at half attention, drifting between the story and whatever thoughts arrived during the gaps. My body was relaxed. The couch was comfortable. The room was warm. I noticed the reflection in the picture window behind me without meaning to. This requires explanation because the window was behind me, which means I wasn't looking at it directly. But the front windows, the two on the wall to my left, were showing reflections of the room, and in those reflections, I could see the picture window behind me, reflected through the room, a window showing a room. The geometry of reflection is multiplicative. Every reflective surface shows every other reflective surface, creating a hall of mirrors effect that extends the room in directions that the architecture doesn't actually contain. When I glanced at the front window, I could see the TV, the couch, myself, the back wall, and the picture window behind me, all reproduced in the glass in a reversed image that was dimmer than reality, but faithful to it, except for the shadow. It appeared in the reflection of the picture window, a dark shape, vertical, roughly the height and width of a person, moving across the reflected image of the living room wall from left to right, moving slowly, at a walking pace. The deliberate, unhurried movement of something crossing a room with a specific destination in mind, passing through a space it knew, covering a distance it had covered before. I saw it in the front window's reflection first. A dark interruption in the reflected image of the back wall, a shape that didn't belong, that was too solid and too defined to be a trick of the television's shifting light. The TV's glow painted the walls in diffuse, moving color. This shadow moved independently. It didn't follow the TV's palette. It didn't brighten when the screen brightened or shift when the scene changed. It had its own velocity, its own trajectory, its own relationship to the room that was separate from every other source of light and movement. I turned around. The wall behind me was empty. The picture window showed nothing but the darkness outside the black glass, reflecting the TV's faint glow back into the room, showing me the couch and the back of my own head and the ceiling and nothing else. The wall to the left of the window was bare. The wall to the right was bare. No shadow, no movement, no shape crossing the room at a walking pace from left to right. I turned back to the front window. The reflection was still there. The shadow was still moving. Crossing the reflected wall behind me, visible in the glass of the front window, existing in the reflection but not in reality. I was looking at two versions of the same room, the actual room behind me, which was still and empty, and the reflected room in the front window, which contained a shadow walking through it that had no source, no cause, no corresponding presence in the physical space it appeared to inhabit. I watched it. I don't know why I didn't get up, didn't turn on the lights, didn't do something that would break the moment and force the room to be one thing instead of two. I watched the shadow in the reflection the way you watch something that your mind hasn't categorized yet, without response, without reaction, with the focused blankness of a person absorbing information that doesn't fit into any existing framework and is waiting for the framework to catch up. The shadow moved at a consistent pace, slow, deliberate. It crossed the reflected wall behind me from left to right, which in the actual room would have been a trajectory from the hallway entrance toward the kitchen archway, a path that passed directly behind the couch where I was sitting. In the reflection, the shadow moved behind the reflected image of my head, behind me, passing behind me in a reflected room that was and wasn't the room I was sitting in, a reflected path that was and wasn't the path through my living room, a reflected presence that was and wasn't there. I turned around again, fast this time. The wall was empty. The room was empty. The picture window showed the room and me, and nothing else. The air behind the couch was undisturbed, uninhabited, showing no evidence of anything moving through it. I turned back. The shadow was reaching the edge of the reflected room. It was moving past the reflected image of the kitchen archway, into the space where the reflection ended and the dark glass began, the boundary between the reflected room and the nothingness beyond it. It didn't pause, it didn't slow. It moved with the same steady pace it had maintained since I first noticed it, crossing the reflected room and continuing past the edge of what the window could show into whatever space exists beyond the frame of a reflection, the unseen rooms, the unreflected hallways, the parts of the house that the glass doesn't reach. 8 seconds. That's how long the whole thing lasted, from the moment I first noticed the shadow to the moment it disappeared past the edge of the reflection. 8 seconds of watching something move through a version of my living room that existed only in glass, only in reflection, only in the reversed and reproduced image of a room that was, in reality, empty. The shadow was gone. The reflection showed the room as it was: the couch, the TV, the walls, the ceiling, me, everything still, everything normal, everything consistent between the actual room and the reflected room, the discrepancy erased, the two versions aligned again, as if they'd never been out of sync. I sat on the couch for a long time after that. The movie continued playing. The TV's glow continued painting the walls. The room remained the room: four walls, a ceiling, a floor, windows that showed reflections when the inside was bright and the outside was dark. Nothing moved, nothing appeared. The reflections in every window showed exactly what they should have shown, and nothing more. I turned on every light in the house. I walked every room. I checked behind every door and inside every closet, and looked in every space where a person or a shadow or a thing that casts a shadow could be. The house was empty. Of course it was. The house had been empty the entire time, empty of everything except me and the television and the light it cast, and the reflections that light created in the windows that I'd bought the house for. I checked the picture window. I stood in front of it and looked at the glass. It was a standard picture window, large, single pane, the original wavy glass that distorts the view slightly, giving the outside world a subtle liquid quality that I'd always found charming. The glass was clean, the frame was solid. The window was a window. It reflected what was in front of it and showed what was behind it, and there was no mechanism, no feature, no quality of the glass or the light or the room that could explain how a shadow moved through the reflection without existing in the room that the reflection was reflecting. I've done research. I've read about optical illusions, about the way reflected light can interact with curved or imperfect glass to produce artifacts that don't correspond to real objects. I've read about pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns, especially human shapes, in random visual data. I've read about hypnagogic hallucinations, the perceptual distortions that can occur in the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, when the brain begins producing dream imagery, while the eyes are still processing real visual input. Each of these explains part of it. None of them explain the movement. The shadow didn't flicker. It didn't shimmer or pulse or appear and disappear. It moved, steadily, continuously, in one direction, at a walking pace, covering a distance that corresponded to a real distance in a real room. It moved the way a person moves when they're walking through a space with direction, with intention, with the particular quality of locomotion that distinguishes something traveling from something merely appearing. Whatever I saw in that reflection was going somewhere. It was crossing my living room. It was passing behind me. And it was doing it in a version of the room that existed only in glass, a room that should have been a copy of the room I was sitting in but contained something the original did not. I've rearranged the living room. The couch is against the back wall now, facing the front windows, with the picture window to my right instead of behind me. I can see it from where I sit. I can see the reflection in it and the reflections in the front windows and the room as it actually is, all at once, all in my field of vision. Nothing behind me, nothing unseen. I've kept the arrangement for over a year. I sit on the couch at night with the TV on and the lights off, and I watch the movie, and I watch the reflections, and the reflections show the room, and the room is empty, and everything is consistent between the glass and the air and the walls and the furniture and me. But sometimes, not often, not predictably, not in any pattern I've been able to identify, I notice something. Not a shadow, not a shape, something subtler, a difference, a discrepancy between what the room looks like and what the reflection of the room looks like that I can't quite identify, can't quite locate, can't hold in focus long enough to name. A sense that the two versions of the room, the real one and the reflected one, are almost but not perfectly aligned. That the reflection is showing me something the room isn't showing me, or isn't showing me something the room is. And the difference is so small and so brief that by the time my eyes adjust and my brain processes and my attention focuses, it's gone and the two versions match again, and I'm left looking at a window that is showing me exactly what it should be showing me with the nagging, persistent, unshakable feeling that it wasn't a moment ago. I still love the windows during the day. The light still pours in. The house still feels open and bright and connected to the landscape. But at night, when the glass reverses and the windows become mirrors and the room extends into its own reflection, I watch. I watch the reflection and I watch the room and I compare them. I look for the shadow. I look for the discrepancy. I look for the moment when the glass shows me something that the room behind me doesn't contain. I haven't seen it again. Not clearly. Not the way I saw it that night, the dark shape, the walking pace, the 8 seconds of something crossing a reflected room that was empty in reality. But I watch, because the windows are mirrors at night, and mirrors show you the room you're in, and the room you're in should be the only room there is. Should be. But the glass doesn't know that. The glass shows what it shows. And on a Saturday night in January, what it showed me was a room that looked like mine and contained something that mine did not, something walking, something patient, something that existed in the reflection and nowhere else, or something that existed everywhere and was only visible in the reflection. I don't know which possibility is worse, that my windows showed me something that wasn't real, or that my windows showed me something that was real and that I could only see because the glass caught it at an angle that my eyes couldn't reach, reflected it from a direction I wasn't facing, revealed it in the one medium that doesn't look where you look, but looks where you aren't looking, behind you, beside you, in the space you can't see without turning, in the room you can't verify without breaking the reflection that showed it to you. I sit on the couch. I watch the movie. I watch the windows. The room is still. The reflection is still. And I wait for the moment, which I know is coming, when they stop being the same thing. I am a person who lives by routine. I say that not as a personality trait or a point of pride, but as a statement of fact. The way you'd say that water flows downhill or that winter comes after fall. Routine is the architecture of my life. It's the structure I've built around the hours of the day to keep them organized and predictable and manageable, and I maintain it with the same attention and consistency that you'd maintain the foundation of a house, because without it, everything above it becomes unstable, and instability is something I've had enough of. The routine at night is specific. I start at 9:30 p.m., television off, kitchen clean, dishes washed, counters wiped, coffee maker loaded, and set to brew at 5:45 a.m. Thermostat adjusted from 68 to 62 for sleeping. Front door checked, deadbolt engaged. Chain set. Back door checked, deadbolt engaged. Windows checked, all latched, all locked. A circuit of the house that I complete in the same order every night, starting at the front door, and moving clockwise through the kitchen, the bathroom, the spare bedroom, and ending at my bedroom. Bedroom door closed. Not pulled to, not left ajar, closed. The latch clicked into the strike plate, the door seated in the frame, the barrier between my sleeping space and the rest of the house, complete and definitive. Lights off, bed, eyes closed. The alarm is set for 6 a.m. The door stays closed until I open it. This has been my routine for 4 years, since I moved into this house in Bath County, Virginia, in the fall of 2020. The house is small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen-living room combination that functions as the entire shared space. It sits on 3 acres of pasture land at the end of a gravel lane that branches off Route 39 about 4 miles west of Warm Springs. The property is bordered by forest on 3 sides and by a hayfield on the 4th, and the nearest neighbor is the Gentry Farm, about a half-mile east, visible as a roofline and a silo above the tree line on clear days, and not visible at all on overcast ones. Bath County is one of the least populated counties in Virginia, fewer than 4,000 people spread across 500 square miles of mountains and valleys and forest. You can drive for 20 minutes on Route 39 without seeing another vehicle. You can stand in my yard at night and hear nothing except the wind and the creek that runs along the southern boundary of the property, and the occasional coyote calling from a ridge that's far enough away to make the sound feel like it belongs to a different world. I live alone. I have lived alone since the move. The house was a foreclosure that I bought at auction for less than what most people pay for a car, and I spent the first 6 months making it habitable, replacing the water heater, patching the roof, tearing out carpet that had gone to mildew, and refinishing the hardwood beneath it. The work gave me something to organize my days around, and when the work was done, the routine replaced it, and the routine has been sufficient ever since. I work from home bookkeeping for 3 small businesses in the area, the kind of work that requires concentration and consistency and rewards precision. My days are structured, my evenings are structured, my nights are structured. The bedroom door closes at 9:45 p.m. and opens at 6 a.m., and between those hours, the house and I exist in a state of mutual agreement. It contains me, I maintain it, and neither of us deviates from the arrangement. The first time it happened was December 9th, 2023. I know the date because I wrote it down afterward, in a notebook I keep on the nightstand for recording things that need to be remembered, appointments, tasks, phone numbers, and now this. December 9th, a Saturday. I'd completed my routine the night before with the usual precision locks, thermostat, doors, windows, bedroom door closed, lights off, bed. The routine was intact. The house was sealed. I fell asleep around 10:15. I woke at 4:12 a.m. Not to a sound. I want to be clear about that because the distinction matters. I've been woken by sounds before the house settling, a branch hitting the roof, the furnace cycling on with its characteristic metallic click. Sound-based waking has a quality to it, a directionality. Your mind identifies the sound, even as it processes the awakening, and you come to consciousness already oriented toward the source. This was different. This was the feeling of being watched. I know how that phrase sounds. I know it's the kind of thing people say in stories when they want to create an atmosphere of unease, a convenient narrative device for introducing threat without specifying its source. But I'm not telling a story. I'm describing what happened. And what happened is that I woke from sleep at 4:12 a.m. with the immediate, physical, undeniable sensation that I was being observed, not the vague unease of a dark room or the paranoia of a half-dreaming mind. A sensation, located in my body, concentrated on my face, my chest, the exposed surfaces of my skin. The feeling of attention directed at me from a specific point in space, the way sunlight is directed from a specific point in the sky. Sourceable, directional, real. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn. The only light was the faint green glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand. 4:12 a.m., the numbers floating in the dark, like something suspended in deep water. My bedroom door was open. Not ajar, not cracked. Open, fully, completely open, pushed back against the wall until the doorknob touched the plaster, the door flat against the surface, the doorway a dark rectangle connecting my bedroom to the hallway beyond. The hallway was black, a perfect, uniform darkness that started at the threshold and extended into the house with no visible end, no shape, no differentiation between floor and wall and ceiling, just dark. The kind of dark that a hallway produces at 4 a.m. in a house with no lights on, and no windows in the corridor, and no source of illumination to give the space any definition. I stared at the open door. The sensation of being watched didn't diminish. If anything, it intensified, focused now, concentrated in the dark rectangle of the doorway, as if the attention I was feeling originated from the hallway, from the darkness, from some point in the blackness beyond the threshold that I couldn't see and couldn't locate and couldn't look away from. I got up. I turned on the bedside lamp. The light filled the room and pushed back the dark in the hallway enough to reveal what was there, which was nothing. An empty hallway. The bathroom door to the left, open. The spare bedroom door to the right, open. The end of the hallway where it met the kitchen living room space, visible as a slightly lighter shade of dark, where the ambient light from the kitchen window provided the faintest illumination. I checked the house. Every room, every closet, every space. Front door deadbolted, chain set, exactly as I'd left it. Back door deadbolted, windows all latched. Thermostat 62 degrees unchanged. Nothing was moved, nothing was missing, nothing was disturbed. The house was locked, sealed, undisturbed, in the precise state I'd left it at 9:45 p.m. the previous night, except the bedroom door, which I had closed, which was now open, which had gone from closed to open sometime between 10:15 p.m. when I fell asleep and 4:12 a.m. when I woke up, moved by a force that left no evidence of its presence, no footprint on the floor, no fingerprint on the door, no disturbance in the locks or the windows or the dust. I closed the door. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. The second time was December 23rd. Same pattern. Routine completed, door closed, asleep by 10:30, woken at 3:47 a.m. by the sensation of being watched. Eyes open, door open fully, flat against the wall, hallway dark. House empty, locked, undisturbed. Nothing missing, nothing moved. Nothing to explain how a closed door became an open door in a house where the only occupant was asleep and the only force acting on the environment was the furnace cycling and the house settling and the winter pressing against the walls. I wrote the date in the notebook. 2 entries now. December 9th, 4:12 a.m. December 23rd, 3:47 a.m. 2 data points, which is not enough to establish a pattern, but is enough to establish that this is not an isolated incident, not a one-time anomaly, not the kind of thing you can file under house settling or poor memory, or the possibility that you didn't close the door as fully as you thought. I closed the door. I know I closed the door. The routine is the routine, and the routine includes closing the door, and I do not deviate from the routine because the routine is the thing that holds the rest of it together. The third time was January 19th. The fourth was February 14th. The fifth was March 3rd. Each time identical routine completed, door closed, woken between 3 and 5 a.m., door open, house empty. Each time the sensation of being watched, centered on the doorway, emanating from the hallway, present when I woke and fading slowly as I turned on lights and checked rooms and confirmed that I was alone. Each date recorded in the notebook, which now contained a growing list of entries that I reviewed periodically, looking for a pattern in the dates, lunar cycle, day of week, weather, temperature, and finding none. The events were irregular, unpredictable, spaced anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks apart, occurring on different days, in different weather, under different conditions. The only constants were the door, the time frame, and the feeling. After the third occurrence, I started wedging a wooden chair under the doorknob. An old kitchen chair with a straight back, positioned with the top rail braced under the knob and the rear legs angled against the floor, creating a triangulated resistance that would prevent the door from being pushed open without first displacing the chair. I'd seen this technique in movies and had always thought it was theatrical, but the principle is sound. The geometry of the chair distributes the force of the door across the floor surface, and the friction between the chair legs and the hardwood creates a resistance that exceeds the force a normal push would generate. The door, braced this way, could not swing open, not easily, not without effort, not without the chair scraping across the floor, producing a sound that would wake even a person who wasn't sleeping with the hypervigilance of someone whose bedroom door keeps opening by itself. The next morning, this was the fourth occurrence, February 14th. I woke at 3:31 a.m. The feeling of being watched, the dark hallway, the door open, flat against the wall. The chair was moved. Not knocked over, not shoved aside. Moved. It was standing upright, positioned about 3 feet from the doorway, facing the bed, as if someone had lifted it out from under the doorknob, carried it a few steps into the room, and set it down carefully, deliberately, in a position that faced the place where I was sleeping. The chair legs showed no scuff marks on the floor, no scratches, no drag lines, no evidence that the chair had been pushed or slid across the hardwood. It had been lifted and placed, quietly, gently, by something that was strong enough to remove the brace and careful enough to set the chair down without making a sound. And it was facing me. The chair that I had positioned as a barricade was now positioned as a seat facing my bed, as if something had removed the obstacle I'd created, carried it into my room, and sat in it, watched me, then left, leaving the chair as evidence of its visit or as a message that barricades were not going to work. After the 5th occurrence, I installed the camera, a basic home security unit, motion activated, mounted on the hallway wall opposite my bedroom door at a height and angle that gave it a clear view of the door and the first 3 feet of hallway in either direction. The camera recorded to an SD card. The resolution was decent, 1080p, infrared for night vision, 30 frames per second. I tested it by walking past it, opening and closing the door, moving at different speeds. The footage was clear. The door was visible. The motion sensor triggered reliably. Whatever opened my door, the camera would see it. March 3rd, I completed the routine. I confirmed the camera was active. The small red LED on the housing was lit, indicating recording mode. I closed the bedroom door. I tested the latch seated, clicked, secure. I got into bed. I fell asleep. I woke at 4:08 a.m., watched. Door open, hallway dark, house empty. I pulled the SD card and reviewed the footage on my laptop. The recording started at 9:47 p.m. when I activated the camera. It showed 8 hours of a closed door. The hallway in infrared gray-green, static. The door a flat rectangle of slightly lighter tone in the frame. The walls featureless, the floor empty. Nothing moved, nothing appeared. The timestamp advanced second by second through the hours of the night, 10 p.m., 11, midnight, 1 a.m., 2, 3, and the door remained closed, sealed, latched, exactly as I'd left it. At 4, 7, and 41 seconds a.m., there was a single frame of static. One frame, 1/30th of a second. A burst of visual noise, the scrambled, pixelated chaos of a signal interrupted, the image replaced by a field of random data that looked like television snow, the kind of static that analog sets used to produce when they lost their signal. One frame of static, lasting 33 milliseconds. At 4, 7, and 42 seconds a.m., one frame later the door was open, flat against the wall. The hallway visible through the doorway. No motion, no transition, no sequence of frames showing the door swinging, the latch releasing, the hinges rotating. Closed, static, open. 3 consecutive frames spanning 1/10 of a second, and in that 1/10 of a second, a closed door became an open door, and the camera either couldn't record the transition or wasn't permitted to. I watched that sequence 100 times. I slowed it down. I advanced frame by frame. Closed door, static, open door. There was nothing between them, no intermediate state, no partially open door, no figure in the hallway, no hand on the knob. The door went from closed to open the way a light goes from on to off instantaneously, completely, without the mechanical intermediate stages that a physical door requires to move from one position to another. Hinges don't work that way. Latches don't work that way. Doors don't work that way. The physical world doesn't work that way. Things move through space, and movement takes time, and time is what cameras record, and the camera recorded nothing. A closed door and an open door, and a frame of static where the explanation should have been. I've tried different cameras. I've tried continuous recording instead of motion activated. I've tried 2 cameras simultaneously, positioned at different angles. The result is always the same. Hours of a closed door. A single frame of static sometimes appearing on one camera, sometimes on both, the timing identical to the millisecond. Then the door is open. The static is always a single frame. The door is always fully open, flat against the wall. The transition is always invisible, always instantaneous, always occurring in the gap between one frame and the next, in the smallest unit of time that the camera can measure. It's happened 11 times now. I've stopped wedging the chair. I've stopped checking the locks. I've stopped searching the house in the middle of the night because the house is always empty and the locks are always engaged and nothing is ever moved or missing or disturbed except the door. The door opens. That's what happens. Between 3 and 5 a.m., on nights that follow no pattern I can identify, my bedroom door goes from closed to open in a way that no camera can capture and no barricade can prevent and no lock can stop. Because there is no lock on the bedroom door, it's an interior door, a hollow core slab with a simple latch. And even if I installed a deadbolt, it wouldn't matter, because whatever opens the door doesn't use the knob, doesn't use the hinges, doesn't use any of the mechanical systems that a door relies on to transition between states. It simply changes the door's state. Closed becomes open, the camera blinks, the static fills the frame, and the hallway is there, dark and empty and watching. I still close the door every night. This might seem irrational, given that the door opens regardless, but the routine is the routine, and abandoning it would mean accepting that the door's behavior has authority over mine, that the thing that opens it has changed the terms of my existence in this house, that I am living in a space where my actions are subordinate to something else's actions. I close the door, it opens. I close it again the next night, it opens again. The cycle continues, and the continuation is its own kind of stability, not the stability I wanted, not the predictable, controlled, consistent stability of a house that behaves the way I arranged it to behave, but a stability nonetheless, a pattern, a routine, even if it's a routine that includes an event I can't explain and can't prevent. What I can't stop thinking about is the feeling, the watching, the sensation that wakes me every time, the directed attention that I feel on my skin, like heat from a source I can't see. The door doesn't wake me. The door makes no sound. I know this because the cameras record audio, and the audio track shows nothing at the moment the static appears. No click, no creak, no sound of any kind. The door opens in silence. But something wakes me. Something pulls me out of sleep in the minutes after the door is opened. And the something is the feeling of being watched from the hallway, from the dark rectangle of the doorway, from whatever is standing there in the space that the cameras can't show me and the infrared can't illuminate and my eyes can't penetrate. I feel it every time. The watching, the attention, the presence in the doorway that stays long enough for me to wake and register the open door and feel the weight of whatever gaze is directed at me from the dark. And then it fades. Slowly, gradually, the way a sound fades as its source moves away, diminishing across distance, the attention withdrawing from the doorway, from the room, from me, retreating into the hallway and beyond, into the house, into whatever space it occupies, when it isn't standing in my doorway at 4 a.m. looking at me. I've thought about leaving. I've thought about selling the house and moving to Staunton or Lexington, somewhere with neighbors and streetlights and the comforting density of other people's lives layered over your own. But I don't think the door is the point. I don't think the house is the point. I think the watching is the point. Something wants to see me sleeping. Something needs to confirm that I'm there, that I'm in the bed, that the room contains what it expects the room to contain, and it opens the door to check, and it stands in the dark and it watches. And when it's satisfied, when whatever question it came to answer has been answered, it leaves. And the door stays open, because closing it was never part of the arrangement. I close it anyway, every night. Latch clicked, frame seated, routine completed. And I lie in the dark and I wait for the feeling, the watching, the attention, the presence that will wake me at some hour between 3 and 5 a.m. on a night I can't predict. And I'll open my eyes and the door will be open and the hallway will be dark and something will be there, in the space between one frame and the next, in the gap the camera can't see, watching me with an attention so focused and so patient that it wakes me from sleep the way sunlight wakes you, by touching your face. I keep the notebook on the nightstand. The entries grow, dates and times, recorded in my handwriting, evidence of a pattern that has no pattern, a routine that runs alongside mine like a shadow alongside a body, connected, synchronized, inseparable. I close the door. It opens. I write the date. I close the door again.